Добрый день, уважаемые.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Welcome to our yet another weekly briefing in the press center of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'll start with one of the materials that coincides with quite an important date in our bilateral and special relations. Tomorrow, April 2nd, we will celebrate the Day of the Union of Russian and Belarusian Peoples, and we will celebrate its 30th anniversary that is linked to the 30th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty on the Establishment of the Community of Russia and Belarus. This is the first integration document that has provided a basis for unifying processes between our brotherly or even sisterly countries. By following this good tradition on this day, heads of states, governments, parliaments, ministries of foreign affairs of the two countries will exchange congratulatory messages, and various solemn events will be organized in Russian and Belarus cities. Moscow and Minsk will host various concerts. Moscow will host a concert, Two Souls, One Destiny, on the new stage of Bolshoi Theater, attended by the State Academic Ensemble of Dance named after Igor Moiseyev and other ensembles. In Minsk, we will have another concert that will be given by the famous Belarusian and Russian artists, and introductory remarks by Russian and Belarusian presidents will be read out at these concerts on April 6. In the embassies of Belarus in Moscow, a photo and documentary exhibition will be opened that will be based on the materials of the Foreign Policy Archive of the Russian Federation, and it shows the key stages of the Russia-Belarus cooperation. And railway link will be launched tomorrow between our border regions on the route Smolensk-Orsha and Smolensk-Vitebsk. And another important that happened today, and it's no joke, April 1st, new TV channel started its broadcasting, Soyuzny, which is a part of the autonomous non-profit organization, media company of Union State. Belarus TV channel has officially finished its work, and it left quite an important footprint in the establishment of a common information space of Russia and Belarus. I would like to say that it wasn't an accidental decision. It was taken as part of the progressive and earlier adopted reform of mass media of Russia and Belarus, in lines with the orders of the Supreme State Council of the Union State of January 29, 2024, and Council of Ministers of the Union State of November 5, 2024. The broadcasting of Soyuzny TV channel will be carried out in 24/7, both in Russia and Belarus, through cable and satellite networks and digital platforms and on the internet and social media, VK Video, VK Clips, Odnoklassniki, as well as in messenger apps. The editorial policy of a new TV channel will be based on media content, and it will convey quite interesting stories about people. And the programs, TV programs, will provide information about ordinary people of various jobs and generations. The key task is to show how everyday life of the Union State is organized, how regions are developing, and how joint projects are implemented. By taking the path of integration in 1996, Russia and Belarus have made outstanding achievements in all spheres, from forging a common space in social and economic, defense, humanitarian, migration and information spheres, to guaranteeing equal rights and opportunities for citizens of our countries. We wish you every success, prosperity as part of our Union State. And now the schedule of the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergey Lavrov, April 3rd, Sergey Lavrov will meet with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Secretary General, who will pay a working visit to Moscow. They plan to exchange views on the SCO's work in the current conditions, and they will focus on strengthening the combined potential of the SCO in the interest of ensuring reliable security and sustainable development of Eurasia is one of the pillars of the multiple world order. April 7th, Sergey Lavrov will have a meeting with Rebecca Grynspan, Costa Rican national, and UNCTAD Secretary General in the context of her nomination for the position of the United Nations Secretary General. The minister will inform Grynspan about the main requirements that the Russian side has for the candidates for such supreme UN position. These requirements include commitment to non-selective observance of the principles enshrined in the UN Charter, impartiality, and commitment to reduce tensions between UN member states and to deal with the domination of Western representatives in the Secretariat. We hope that Grynspan, in her turn, will express her own views on the current work of the United Nations and how to organize it in the future. We believe that UN work, the work of the United Nations today is quite ineffective, and it doesn't fully meet the aspirations of the world majority. Of our particular interest in our approaches of the UNCTAD Secretary General to crisis, in particular around Ukraine and Iran. I recall that on April 8th, Sergey Lavrov will chair the 46th session of the Council of Heads of Constituent Entities of the Russian Federation under the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It will be attended by governors, senior officials of the Presidential Executive Office and federal authorities. On the agenda is strengthening of cooperation between Russian regions and African partners, development of recommendations to intensify work of regions in this field, and development of Russia-China regional cooperation and other relevant issues. And also we will hold a presentation on April 9th at 11 a.m., a presentation of the International Youth Festival, which is the largest youth event in the world. I recall that the festival will take place in Yekaterinburg from September 11th to 17th. We expect that it will be attended by 10,000 Russian and foreign young people from 190 countries of the world, including children at the age from 14 to 17. As part of the regional program of the festival, participants will visit 30 Russian regions, including the Republic of Abkhazia. We hope that this event will help to demonstrate the creative potential of our country and hospitality of the Russian people, as well as it will help to develop professional youth initiatives, and it will help to nurture friendship and cooperation. Heads of diplomatic missions, representatives of youth organizations and federal authorities, entrepreneurs, Russian and foreign journalists are invited to this presentation that will take place in the mansion of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this presentation, we will hear the remarks of the first deputy chief of the Presidential Executive Office of the Russian Federation, Sergey Kiriyenko, deputy Prime Minister of Russia, Dmitry Chernyshenko, Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov, and the Chief of the Federal Youth Agency, Grigory Gurev. We will soon open accreditation for this event, and we will provide a web link to this event in the transcript of the briefing. We invite Russian and foreign mass media and representatives of diplomatic corps to visit the presentation. There are many fakes in mass media. You're welcome to this event. You can ask your questions. You can take an active part in this presentation, and you can tell your foreign audience about it. Well, and as for the Russian mass media, they regularly follow the festival and events organized as part of it. So we will welcome everyone who is interested in it, especially Russian journalists. And now let's talk about international agenda. I would like to start with another memorable date. I wouldn't say that this is an important date, but it's a tragic date because we had tragic events in our history. This is a tragic farce of today's information space and geopolitical space. This week we will mark the 4 years of the cruel and cynical staged performance in Bucha that was organized by Zelensky's regime and his Western sponsors. I recall that on April 2nd, 2022, foreign mass media, British media in particular, and the Ukrainian media later, accused Russian servicemen who had left on March 30th, 2022, Bucha, Kiev region. They accused them of massacring civilians of the city. It was obvious from the very beginning that the situation in Bucha was staged, because when the Russian armed forces were in Bucha, they haven't restricted the freedom of movement, they didn't block exit from the city, and moreover, residents were able to make calls and use the internet. If hundreds of Ukrainians would be killed and tortured, as it was described by the Kiev regime and the Western mass media, then we would see numerous photos and videos, chronicles, although we haven't received any complaints about the actions taken by the Russian servicemen, and it was publicly confirmed by Bucha Mayor Anatoly Fedoruk, who didn't complain the next day after our troops left the city. Anatoly Fedoruk has been Bucha's mayor since 1998. Why Western journalists who has made up a story about the Bucha massacre didn't ask Anatoly Fedoruk what made him to change his position? Why he posted videos about the withdrawal of Russian forces from Bucha without mentioning mass killings of civilians? He said that the life was coming back to normal in Bucha, and then he started to tell harrowing stories about residents of Bucha who were tortured and killed by Russian servicemen. But, well, they are not doing that because it wouldn't fit into the picture that they have created for their audience. This picture will be drawn in NATO and will be prepared for the audience. Well, the answer is clear. When Anatoly Fedoruk shot videos for his social media accounts, he didn't know that a staged performance will be organized and dead bodies would be placed on the streets of Bucha, and Russian soldiers who delivered and handed 452 tons of humanitarian aid to locals will be shamelessly accused of killing them. Unfortunately, these false narratives are encouraged by the leadership of the UN Secretariat, in particular by Antonio Guterres. We have requested the assistance from the United Nations and from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. We asked them to provide a name list of those whose bodies were shown on the footage distributed by Western mass media on September 22nd, 2022. At the session of the UN Security Council, Sergey Lavrov openly made a request to the UN Secretary General. After that, Sergey Lavrov has made personal requests to Antonio Guterres on many occasions, but we haven't received any reply, although our permanent mission have made numerous requests to the UN Secretariat. In parallel, Russian investigative bodies have launched a criminal case to determine the circumstances. In September 2024, the Investigative Committee and Prosecutor General's Office of Russia have submitted their request to the United Nations to receive assistance in getting available information on this situation. Well, if so many visits were made to Bucha, well, probably they have something to show to the Russian side. And what do you think? Only in July 2025, we have received a response from the UN Office of Legal Affairs, which was just a bureaucratic response. So the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights have looked into the Russian request and came to conclusion that the information cannot be disclosed. Why? the information cannot be disclosed because it would violate confidentiality obligation that the office has for third persons, and that this information would pose the security of the United Nations to risk. So UN Secretary General can go to Bucha and it doesn't pose risk to his security, but yet sharing information with the Russian side and providing specific facts of the situation is prohibited because it might endanger the security of the United Nations work. Well, it's clear that the situation in Bucha was fake. Everything that was presented by BBC and Western journalists was fake. These conclusions that we received in the bureaucratic response are ridiculous. The same explanation was earlier provided by Volker Turk. To substantiate his point, he referred to conclusions made by odious structures that we do not recognize, and I'm referring to Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine and United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, who allegedly confirmed crimes that were allegedly committed by the Russian servicemen in Bucha. So the Human Rights Observatory in Syria, if you remember, was stationed in Pizzeria in London, and Le Murzier, its leader, disappeared later. And the observatory and its chief were forgotten, and the human rights issues in Syria were also put under the rug. We have reasons to believe that the UN Secretariat deliberately avoids constructive cooperation with the Russian side, which violates the well-established practice of cooperation with states in the interests of administration of justice. We do not accept such approach. In this connection, we continue to request from UN officials at all levels to abandon non-constructive approach and to stop covering up staged performance organized by Ukraine, and to facilitate and to carry out an investigation of provocative action in Bucha. Today, Bucha, like memorials to Ukrainian famine and Heavenly Hundred in Kiev, have turned into a place of political pilgrimage, ritual. And all this visiting Western officials should make an oath that they are lying. At our briefing on March 18th, we have already provided information about the number of visiting Western officials who had gone to Bucha, and we again provide information in the transcript of our briefing. This is absolutely ridiculous when everyone knows that Bucha massacre is false, but they cannot step out from this vicious cycle of lies. Yesterday, on March 31st, representatives of 26 EU countries apart from Hungary, led by the EU High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, have went to another Sabbath to hypocritically mourn victims and to accuse Russia of all faults. Well, by visiting Bucha, they have revealed their actions and what they did in Bucha. To cement this topic, the Kiev regime has adopted a decision to build a memorial complex, and plaques with the names of victims have become one of its elements. So officials were putting candles to their plaques in front of the camera. For 4 years, they've been saying us that they can't give us names because, if we remember, according to the bureaucratic response of the United Nations Secretariat, it would violate confidentiality obligations in front of third persons, and it would put the work of the United Nations at risk. And now it turns out that you could place names of Bucha residents that were viciously killed by Russian servicemen, but yet they can put these names openly for in front of the cameras.
That was a symbol of not the crimes committed by Russia, but it was what the EU and Ukraine are capable of to justify their own war crimes. The so-called, and I quote, the massacre in Bucha is a bright testament to the Goebbels-like propaganda. The more violent, the more flagrant is the lie, the more ready will be people to believe in it. The same goes for thousands of abdicated children, the destruction of birth centers, the explosion of the drama theater in the city of Mariupol. As far as the crimes in Odessa go, they don't want to believe it. Where is the memorial that would commemorate the victims? You don't have to make up their names. You don't have to hide these names from the public. Everyone knows these names. Their family members, their names have been described in memory books. Their names have not been fabricated. They have their surnames, dates of birth, zip codes. That's the reality, and that's what's happening on the ground. Did anyone come from the European Union to the House of the Trade Unions? Nobody did. Can I ask you a question? When these Western clowns will visit the Iranian primary school where 170 or over 170 children died, primarily children, when will that happen? Never? Well, they will have to give us an answer, and we'll come to that topic later on during our briefing. We see a worldwide fake industry operating, blood-curdling testimonies of the so-called witnesses, but in reality there are no facts and blatant lies and they are confused. First they said they could not share any names because that would put at risk their families, but then they would provide these names, and the question is, well, why now? What's changed? You can only counter it with truth. Our foes should be sure that we will continue to seek truth, and we call upon all reasonable people to not believe those people who have only been lying so far. One should only base one's suggestions on truth and factual information. The Kiev regime continues to attack civilian infrastructure and people. Last week, a number of Russian cities have been subject of attacks. 20 people died, including one child. 137 people were injured, including 3 people. Does Kaya Kallas want to make a statement regarding this? I'd like to give her facts. Ukrainian UAVs, including kamikaze drones, attacked the Bryansk region, the settlement of Zernovo, killing 1 local resident. On March 26th this year, Belgorod region, the Voznesenovka settlement, a 7-year-old girl and her mother were injured. March 28th, the Bucha settlement, a family with babies born in 2020-2022 was moving in a civilian vehicle. The 25-year-old mother died. On the same day, in the Yaroslav region, in a residence house at the Michurinets gardening community, a girl born in 2024 died. Her parents were hospitalized with severe injuries overnight into March 30th as a result of a attack. 3 employees of a metallurgical plant in Alchevsk were injured. On the same day, UAVs heavily attacked the city of Taganrog of the Rostov region. 1 person died, 8 injured. These are all civilians, and of course they will be brought to justice. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to gather the evidentiary base to bring Ukrainian militants and foreign mercenaries to justice. Militants of the AFU, Roman Kirikov, Nikolai Trofanov, Viktor Ustinov, and Andrei Shkvikov were accused of committing terrorist attack in the Kursk region. According to the Investigative Committee of Russia, currently 675 criminal cases have been initiated, including 260 of them have already been heard by courts. And in absentia, the commander of the unmanned system forces of the AFU, Robert Brody, nicknamed Madyar, was sentenced. Internationally wanted is now operator of 105th Ukrainian Border Unit, Yuri Andrushenko. He launched an UAV towards the Bryansk region that injured a civilian. A Georgian citizen, Shmagit Digmalashvili, for participating in hostilities on the AFU side, was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Now, the summit of the Joint Expeditionary Force in Helsinki, it took place on March 26th. It was led by Britain. Of course, Scandinavian and Baltic countries also took part in this summit. And of course, using via video conference, Canadian Prime Minister and Zelensky joined this meeting, also via video conference. This group does rapid response with rapid response in the North Atlantic, Arctic, and Baltic regions. But the goal of the meeting was the discussion of further support for the Kiev regime at the backdrop of the shifted focus of the U.S. Towards the Middle East. A lot of issues have been discussed there. One of them was the tightening of the sanctions pressure on Russia and the fight against its so-called shadow fleet. Zelensky said that Ukraine, which received in 2025 the status of enhanced partners of these forces, said that Ukraine was ready to become a full-fledged member of this format and to contribute to its development. Now, what does it do? Rapid response in the North Atlantic. What does Ukraine have to do with it? The Arctic and the Baltic regions. I remember head of a foreign policy agency of Britain said it would be easier to use the Black Sea to deploy one's navy to the Atlantic. Maybe that's what Zelensky wants to do. Zelensky advertised the experience that the AFU accumulated when countering UAVs. He suggested discovering the possibilities of uniting the potentials of national military-industrial complexes to establish a true defense and industrial alliance. He also defended the creation in Europe of a powerful legislation that would allow the countries to block Russian shipments and to seize the oil. That's the rapid response in the North Atlantic, Baltic, in the Baltic region. That's what Zelensky suggested. The participants of the summit left these suggestions unattended. They know themselves what they have to do with oil. They need Zelensky for other purposes. There were no breakthrough solutions to additionally help technically and militarily the Kiev regime. And the calls of Zelensky to provide Ukraine with membership in these forces was also left unanswered. At this backdrop, a mere consolation award for the boss Anna Novikova was the statement of London on March 27th this year on providing a new military aid package to the tune of 100 million pounds sterling to provide a Ukrainian air defense system to reach a just and solid peace on the conditions of Kiev. This step was coupled with the provision of 500 million pounds sterling that the British announced, resulting in the 33rd meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, or the so-called Ramstein format. These are the people that really care about things like who put their hands on somebody's lap or some statements on the social media, and these are the same people who meet Zelensky and use Zelensky as a symbol of their unity. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of heinous statements of Verkhovna Rada member Natalia Pipa regarding her viewpoint of the heroes of the Second World War, the soldiers of the anti-Hitler coalition. She called them, and I'm sorry I have to say this, because this is a direct quote, first, and second, the world should know who the West is sponsoring. She called the soldiers of the anti-Hitler coalition, this member of the Verkhovna Rada, Natalia Pipa, well, she called them bastards. Take the Ramstein group. The Joint Expeditionary Forces, other organizations provide money to pump this ideology. It's not about human rights, freedom, friendship, or peace. That's what they are sponsoring. First, Britain. That's Britain. It talked about how it is committed to the Nuremberg outcomes. The British people have always remember about the deeds of their own heroes and of the heroes of the Soviet Union. I remember the letters that were written on behalf of the British, on behalf of its leader, and in those letters we saw words of awe before the deeds of the heroes, first and foremost of the Red Army following the Stalingrad battle. Those people who now have become the right to vote, to live in Britain, whose grandfathers fought shoulder to shoulder with the Red Army soldiers, now call the soldiers of the anti-Hitler coalition bastards. March 27th, member of the Voice Party of Ukraine, Madam Pipa, commented on the inscription. What kind of inscription was that? It was an inscription on the memorial that provoked this heinous reaction. And the inscription was, "Their deeds will live forever and their names are immortal." This inscription you could see on a monument close to the museum commemorating the victims of the Second World War. It was opened in 1981, and up until 2015 it was the Museum of the Great Patriotic War. Their deeds would live forever and their names are immortal. The deputy of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine called this inscription atrocious, and I directly quote her: "Their deeds will not live forever because," and please apologize me for. I would like to apologize because the bastards cannot have any deeds or feats. She used the Ukrainian language to talk about it. I don't know why, because maybe she thought that only Ukrainian native speakers could read this information. Maybe she wanted to make it less atrocious. In any case, she spared the Russian language, at least. Well, I'd like to thank her for not doing that in the Russian language. At the same time, in her attempts to vilify the feat of the Soviet people and to desecrate the memory of all those who liberated the world from fascism, she exceeded her like-minded compatriots, and she offended most Ukrainians, first and foremost, whose predecessors lost their lives from the Hitler army. The number of victims in the Ukrainian Republic exceeded 7 million people. Almost every Ukrainian family lost their family members, and pretty much everyone fought on the bright side, on the side of the anti-Hitler coalition. She called them bastards. No, these are not bastards. These are heroes, and we will preserve their memory regardless of what these Banderites are saying now. Those were people who sacrificed their lives so that she herself could see this world and not become a subject of fascist slavery. It's not an exaggeration. Remember Eric Koff, High Commissar, when talking to a legendary Soviet spy, Nikolai Kuznetsov, who infiltrated his entourage, said, and I quote him, Eric Koch said him, the Third Reich is a nation of masters, and we should harshly and justly rule this world. Koch said, and I quote him, we don't need any Russians, Ukrainians, or Poles. Koch said that Germany only needs lands. We would like to Germanize the lands, not the people. Koch said that Germans will settle in these lands. And he said, representing the Third Reich, he said we would not spare a single Ukrainian and exploit each and every one of them. And each German worker, terms in racial and ideological terms, is 1,000 times better than any local residents. So who did the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada member call bastards? Maybe she was confused. Maybe bastards were those who wanted to annihilate the people of the USSR, Russians, Ukrainians, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, other nationalities. Maybe they did it because the Third Reich thought that it is only them who has the right, all rights, and everyone has no rights. This post was negatively commented, and the member started to vindicate herself, and she even said that her words were taken out of the context. What kind of context was that? The context of the Banderite statements favoring the Nazi ideology? Maybe that was the context. She even started talking that she does not believe that the soldiers are bastards, but those are bastards who glorified the empire. What was the inscription devoted to? The memorial complex, the museum, the soldiers. So that's That's who she's talking about. She said that her grandfather was a member of the Red Army. She started showing his photographs wearing the Soviet uniform. Well, it was too late. It convinced no one. The users continue to leave comments, genuine and frank ones, direct ones. And I think it was right to the point when one of the users said the following: the inscription, likewise, the same memorial was devoted to rank and file people, and we just should remember their deeds. And you, Madam Pipa, called your own grandfather a bastard. She was not the only one. All those horrible people on Bankova are of the same opinion. Why? Because we have evidence. Every day we provide you with evidence. At every briefing on March 29th, Ukrainian media outlets said that Bankova had decided, and I want to apologize once again, to establish a pantheon of prominent Ukrainians where prominent representatives of the Ukrainian people could be reburied, whose burial sites are now abroad. To do that, the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs already did some preparation works to identify 89 burial sites of Ukrainians in 21 countries, among which are activists of Ukrainian People's Republic, West Ukrainian People's Republic, Organization of Ukrainian Nationalist Ukrainian Insurgent Army. It's not the Madam Pipa who went crazy. The whole Ukrainian coterie went crazy. So the names that they want, of the people who want to rebury, don't matter, as they say. The Ukrainian authorities want to rebury the ashes of Stepan Bandera. His remnants are now in a Munich cemetery. The tomb was covered with paint. The flags of Ukraine were ripped off, and in 2014 it was an attempt to explode it. As far as other heroes goes, Andrei Melnik, Evgeny Konovaltsev, Simon Petlura, their burial sites are located in Paris, Rotterdam, Luxembourg.
Plans to establish the so-called pantheon is yet another attempt of the agonizing regime to dance on graves and to boost military morale and patriotism in the Ukrainian society, as well as their approval ratings. Well, it's difficult to say what the idea could lead to, but one thing is clear. It is unlikely that this place will be revered among Ukrainians whose ancestors fell victims to the terror waged by aggressive Ukrainian nationalists who betrayed their compatriots on so many occasions and who served faithfully to their enslavers, Hitlerites. Office of the President continues to fight against common sense and the Russian language. We have already provided examples of glaring human rights violations of the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. Unfortunately, Ukrainian authorities continue to make relentless attempts to forcefully change the linguistic identity of Ukrainian citizens, and quite often these attempts become more and more absurd and immoral. Ukrainian mass media have recently reported that unknown inspectors in schools in Odessa went through personal belongings of teachers and checked their phones to make sure that they they comply with the linguistic laws. In particular, they were interested in what language teachers used in speaking with the parents in messenger apps, and victims of such abuse described their experience as extremely humiliating. There is another glaring example, an appalling situation with the dismissal of the professor at the Odessa National Technological University for speaking Russian during exam. According to the Office of the State Language Protection Commissioner, a complaint was filed by one of the students who reported that teacher spoke Russian with students and used Russian in examination materials. A professor explained that due to technical issues, he had to use older version of examination materials so that students could sit an exam, and he spoke Russian with students because students asked him question in Russian. Explanations didn't help, and professor was dismissed despite the explanation. You know that in the West there are different people. They have some medical conditions right from their birth. There are some physiological, spiritual, mental problems that they're dealing with. There are two sexes, male and female, but if they deny that, they are dismissed in the United States because there are as many genders as they want. They even changed the American passport. They wrote that there is another category of sex, sex X, which everyone can use to identify themselves with. Well, probably there are glaring examples that we're talking about, and we can say what is happening in Ukraine, and it's just as a follow-up to what I have just explained. There is another appalling situation that was described in the internet post made by a young female. She tried to call an ambulance for her grandfather, who had a stroke in front of his great-grandson. She explained that emergency call handler firmly stopped the attempts to speak Russian. She shouted at her and made her repeat the same information in Ukrainian by subjecting a patient to a lethal risk. Just think, what are they doing in Ukraine? What are they fighting for? They are fighting for calling an ambulance by using a language that is convenient for them. Yelena Ivanovskaya, who is again a state language protection commissioner, Sprachenführer, makes her own contribution to the linguistic bigotry in Ukraine. She standed out by putting forward an odious initiative. She offered to double or even triple fines for violating linguistic laws in order to talk sense into citizens. That's what she said. She's just following the logic, neo-Banderite logic. If you don't know what to do, you can impose a ban or impose a fine. Manhunt is ongoing in Ukraine for many days. It's just a new chapter in the history of Ukraine. Quite an interesting situation happened in Poland in this context. In the interview to one of the local media, a senior lecturer at the Institute of Slavic Studies of the Polish Academy of Sciences, Pavel Levchuk, explained that in 2022, 75% of Ukrainian school students in the 8th year of their studies picked Russian for a second foreign language exam. They have picked Russian to take an exam, although the Ukrainian language was still an option. So it turns out that when people have a choice, they choose the Russian language. What is the democratization of society? It's the right to be free, as they explained, right to speak your opinion. What opinion can they express if they are not allowed to use their native language? Well, Polish authorities have changed rules, and now only those Ukrainians who studied Russian as a second foreign language in Polish schools can take an exam in Russian. Well, that is absolutely absurd and ridiculous and crazy. You can't take an exam in a foreign language that you want. You need to take an exam, foreign language exam, that taking into account the foreign language that you studied at school. They're trying to provide an explanation, but they don't like to do that. They even can't explain what is going on. That is why they are taking action to block mass media, to expel journalists, to strip them of their their accreditation, because journalists have an opportunity to cover their actions. I recall that almost a half of Ukrainian citizens in the survey conducted by a Center of Social and Marketing Research in December 2025 weren't afraid to admit that they are speaking Russian at home. They weren't afraid to say that. 11.3% speak only Russian, and almost 35%, 34.7% to be exact, are speaking Russian and Ukrainian. Although, when people do not speak Ukrainian, they will be fined, they will be dismissed, they will be bullied by nationalists, and they will face with physical threats and use of force. Kiev junta doesn't care about rights and linguistic preferences of the Ukrainian people because they see the Ukrainian people as expendable material. As soon as the criminal regime took power in Kiev, the result of the coup d'etat in 2014, it embarked on a total eradication of the Russian language and forced reformatting of millions of compatriots in order to intimidate them and then to wage violent war to annihilate that part of population, at that time Ukrainian part of population, that actually was too hard to handle. The brave people of Donbass and Novorossiya, at the cost of huge sacrifices, was able to uphold their right to speak and to think in their native language. But they continue to prosecute Ukrainians who know how to speak Russian because they were raised with speaking Russian. They were raised by their mothers, grandmothers, fathers, and grandfathers. Fairy tales were read out in Russian, and Russian was a language of instruction, and they even studying the Mendeleev table of chemical elements in Russian. Well, probably I think this table of elements should be banned in Ukraine. Again, all these facts that I have provided earlier confirm that all the goals to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, to eradicate threats emanating from its territory, hold true, and all these goals will be achieved. When you have no opportunity or desire to explain something, you just block mass media, you expel journalists, etc. Now, municipal authorities of Brussels have cancelled the film screening made by a Belgian journalist of the media project Kairos Press, Alexandre Penasse. This movie is called Russia, Ukraine under the Smokescreen, and this picture shows the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine and tragedy in Donbass, and it was of great interest both in Belgium and in other countries of the EU. This film was created based on the materials that were collected during the visit of a group of foreign journalists to our country. They visited Donbass as well. Well, as soon as they started to talk about the root causes of the conflict, and as soon as they realized that they can see the real state of affairs in Donbass, punitive and propagandist machine has entered the stage. It acts as a censoring agency. It exists at the financial support provided by the West to the Kiev regime. And they are doing that not only with regard to Russia and Ukraine, they are using that with regard to a large number of issues. They are ready to train Western servicemen they are ready to use their experience in using UAVs, and they have a good experience of working in the Arctic, and the Baltic region again has become one of the areas of their interest and experience. They are imposing a new misanthropic ideology, the center of which is Russophobic bigotry that is targeting Russia and everything that is Russian. They are taking substantive efforts to conceal the neo-Nazi essence of the current Ukrainian authorities and the war crimes committed by them. That's what the Belgian officials are doing. They carry out the given instructions and they cancel the film screening under false pretext, although there is an official version that this movie might cause riots. It's absolutely ridiculous because this pretext could be used for anything. Anything might cause mass riots in the countries of the European Union. Everything should be banned if we follow this logic. It's yet another attempt not to allow authors of the movie to bring truth to ordinary Belgians who are paying for maintaining the Kiev regime and for pumping it with weapons and for terrorist acts committed by the Kiev regime. They continue to pursue a line to totally push out any opinion from the European information space that doesn't fit into the official narrative. And that's not the single case of how they are treating foreign journalists in Europe. Just look at the situation in another country. The Hague, March 27th. Journalist of Russia Segodnya Anastasia Ivanova had to finish her work in The Hague. What was the reason? The Dutch authorities refused to extend her residence permit. Again, what was the reason for that? She had her own view of the use of unilateral sanctions imposed by the EU against mass media. The Russian journalist was notified. I'm sorry, I have to read it out because that's how that's what the document says. The document says that this Russian journalist presents a threat to the national security. So when this journalist was beaten on the streets of Paris when she was making reports about Yellow Vest movements and reprisals that were carried out against French nationals by the law enforcement agencies, well, she didn't hear any qualification that such actions might be categorized as a threat to national security, but yet, according to Dutch authorities, this journalist presents a threat to the national security of the Netherlands. She tried to appeal the decision, but the procedure is protracted by the authorities. Her banking accounts were blocked, and they continued to lay claims against the Russian journalist to complicate her stay in the Netherlands as much as possible. There is only one conclusion that we can make from the situation. They don't want her to work there. That's the main purpose of Brussels, the European bureaucracy, so the journalists wouldn't have an opportunity to work in The Hague and what is really happening. And there was another incident when there was a passport check at the airport. Journalist was taken from the line and she was sent to an interrogation room which speaks volumes about the rights of journalists. And we warned The Hague that we warned the Netherlands and their embassy that this action wouldn't be left without response. We have been in contact with the Dutch diplomats for months, and we have been trying to find a solution to the situation. We explained that if our Russian journalist isn't allowed to work in the Netherlands, then it means that the Dutch journalists wouldn't be allowed to work in Russia. It's not because we don't want to we don't want them to work in our country. We have good work with them. We are working with all generals, with all journalists from both friendly and unfriendly countries, but if they want to expel a Russian journalist from their country, we will respond in a similar way. Again, it's not our choice, and we offered various solutions, but to be honest and to be fair, the Dutch embassy in Moscow understand how harmful the actions taken by the Dutch government are. There are some structures and bodies in the Netherlands who follow the instructions of their older brother, and Dutch diplomats did their best to resolve the situation and to not make it absurd, but they failed, unfortunately. That's why this practice of persecutions and discriminations by Netherlands against Russian journalists is still ongoing, and since that's how they are behaving towards our journalists in defiance of the advice given by their diplomats in Moscow, we cannot leave the situation as it is, and we have talked about it on many occasions. In response, we have to make a decision to nullify the accreditation of a correspondent of one of the Dutch mass media. We are ready to revisit our decision if the Dutch government creates proper conditions for the work of the Russian journalist. Then we will reconsider our decision. As for now, one of the Dutch journalists should pack their things, because unfortunately their own country, that's what their country did to the Dutch journalists. And please don't start saying that it was Moscow who took decision. It's a decision taken in response to actions taken by the Netherlands.
The official Chisinau continues to accuse our country in all possible sins. Why? We don't know. Maybe they should start telling the people the truth. They don't like it, and they can't do it. In early March, Russia was accused of polluting the Dniester River. Now, they are talking about the energy sector. On March 23rd, the Moldovan authorities announced the disconnection of the Isaccea-Vulcanești power line. It is the main line of import of energy from the European network of transmission system operators, in particular from Romania. They have not waited for investigation results, and the official Chisinau placed responsibility on our country, having no other options at hand. Did they present any evidence? Of course not. They only resorted to unfounded accusations. Then the Moldovan media outlets propagated the information that the true reason was a simple short circuit. But that was later. First, they accused Moscow. Well, a reasonable question arises. Why would they stir up the anti-Russian hysteria? Well, the answer is simple. The next day, on March 23rd, they had to take a decision to introduce an emergency situation in Moldova in the energy sector for the duration of 60 days. On March 28th, the work of the line was restored. But, as you can imagine, the regime of an emergency continues to be in place. So this simple lie was done by the Moldovan authorities, led by Sandu, with regard to the Moldovan people. It's a play, the game they're playing with their own people. Whatever you call it, the emergency situation, the regime of heightened readiness, the Moldovan authorities need that to expand the mandate of their law enforcement bodies and to limit the Russian media outlets. It is notable that when in 2021 pro-Western powers came to power in Moldova, the country, well, since they came to power, Moldova was under the state of emergency for more than 2 years in total. They used the state of heightened emergency to implement the instructions of their Brussels sponsors to strip the Moldovans of their sovereignty, history, and culture. They rewrite their history. Here are fresh examples. In the eve of the Day of Liberation of the second largest city of Moldova, Belzi, on March 26th, unidentified persons destroyed an exhibition commemorating the heroes of the Young Guard, an underground anti-fascist youth organization. This vandalism against display boards on the Boris Glavan street, a participant of the aforementioned organization, the native of the Republic, was atrociously killed by fascists in 1943, and this act of vandalism that we're talking about now was left without reaction by the official Chisinau. On March 27th, in the Moldovan capital, with the participation of school children, an opening ceremony took place of the so-called Cemetery of Romanian Heroes at the military garrison cemetery of the Russian Imperial Army. The date was, it was no coincidence that the date was March 27th. On this date, in 1918, 108 years ago, the members of the so-called Council of the country, in violation of democratic procedures in the presence of Romanian soldiers and gendarmes, took a decision to reunite Bessarabia and Romania in the Moldavia itself. This event was called the profanation of memory. On the same day, on March 27th, the Alexandre Penasse Association of Historians of Moldova and the National Reunification Platform hold a roundtable on the another anniversary to exceed Bessarabia to Romania. Following this event, the representative of the scientific community of the Republic adopted a declaration that called the Soviet monuments instruments of the Russian propaganda and called upon Moldovan authorities to take immediate and concrete measures to cleanse the public space from these vestiges symbolizing the occupation regime. The Moldovan authorities, and I quote them, to take immediate measures to cleanse the public space from these remnants symbolizing the occupational regime. We remember the head of the cleansing campaign that Bulgakov wrote about. In Ukraine, he was declared the enemy of the people, the imperialist. Sharikov, that was his name. But then they were surprised. Who nominated Sharikov as the head of the cleansing campaign? One can now talk about nomination here. Who nominated this person? The European integrational model is now being imposed on Moldova, and it's a testament to the colonial policies of the Western metropoles that deny the right of other countries to independently prosper. The Moldovan authorities are enthusiastic about playing this game, which is destroying the national identity of the country. I think they're seriously thinking that the metropoles will reward them for these policies, but you can see the reverse happening. In the best case scenario, they will just forget about these efforts, but that's not the limit even. Now, over to the U.S. and Israeli aggression against Iran. We have been commenting on it frequently, and I'll be ready to answer your questions, but taking into account that every day Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov and his deputies, deputy foreign ministers, and our relevant heads and our permanent representatives at the international organizations, our ambassadors, give detailed comments about the situation, so I'll just limit my account to the humanitarian aid to the people of Iran. So just once again, if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. We continue to provide humanitarian aid to the people of Iran who on a daily basis is affected by unsubstantiated attacks on the part of Iran, of the U.S. and Israeli. On March 27th, another batch of humanitarian aid was transferred to Iran. It was transported there by rail. It consisted of over 300 tons of medicines. This operation was done at the instruction of Russian President Vladimir Putin on the same day, on March 27th. A convoy of trucks delivered another batch of humanitarian aid that was collected by charitable institutions and residents of the Republic of Dagestan. It consists of over 150 tons of bare essentials and food. We are grateful to the Azerbaijani authorities for providing this assistance to us. From every nook and cranny of our countries, we receive appeals from concerned citizens who are ready to donate their own money to help their friendly Iranians, that the friendship with whom they cherish very much. That's not the question of nationality, ethnicity, or a religion. Our citizens have responded in the same vein to any other tragedies that happen to other people in other parts of the world. We're talking about human-induced catastrophes, pandemics, and hot phases of conflicts, wars. That's the way our people respond to somebody else's sufferings. We have seen a lot of examples how our citizens collected aid, humanitarian aid, for, let's say, their brothers and sisters that were at that time being under the authorities, under the patronage of the Ukrainian regime. You saw convoys of trucks delivering humanitarian aid. Or maybe you can remember the developments in Syria. Of course, Turkey also suffered from earthquakes. People collected humanitarian aid, dispatched it, helped in any way possible. Just see how our people react when Venezuela and Cuba need our help. Take any country on our globe. Whatever country needs support or help, when they ask for it, we always respond to it, both at the official level, and that's the first reason. And the second reason is that our citizens are really concerned about it. Under such hard circumstances, the official leadership and our rank-and-file citizens stand in solidarity with Iran and help them not in word but also in deed. Now over to those who don't help but only obstruct and derail initiatives. Mark Rutte reported on the results of NATO alliance activities for 2025. Russia was called, and I directly quote him, the most significant threat to our security and to our peace and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area, and the end of quote. Who authorized Rutte to talk about it in this way? Oh, well, they don't care about it. Yet another time, they have accused us unfoundedly, unsubstantiatively, of different violations, of airspace violations, subversive activities, and even some kind of a malicious cyber activity. I'd like to ask a direct question to Mark Rutte. Have you found those people who detonated the Nord Stream pipelines? Those were the countries and the companies who sponsored the pipelines, the companies of the Euro-Atlantic region. Have you found those people? No, you haven't, so we have to keep searching. NATO shot itself in the foot, and by publishing this report, they demonstrated whose activities provoke the tensions in the world and can lead to hostilities and conflicts. So let's look at the document. It notes that the total defense spending in 2025 amounted to $1.64 trillion at current prices. According to the International Institute of Strategic Research, the global defense spending in 2025 amounted to $2.63 trillion. So just 30 NATO countries account for about 62% of the total defense spending. So are you sure we're still a threat, taking into account such staggering numbers? The exercises of NATO under the aegis of NATO, around 160 maneuvers have been held, more than 700 exercises have been held, and we see that the so-called partner countries are taking an increasingly active part in this. This aggressive mentality is spreading out, and it's from Brussels, and we see that they do not only engage in defense campaigns, but also, and NATO documents reflect this, offensive campaigns. For example, remember the scenario to block the Kaliningrad region. You can see the numbers are telling everything, and they call upon the direct confrontation, armed confrontation with Russia. As far as Europe goes, the report says that Europe is arming itself increasingly. They have increased their defense spending by 20%, and it's not a secret that the livelihoods are worsening in Europe, and you can see that the most vulnerable parts of the population are suffering. Employment is on the rise. Social programs are being cut down. In August 2025, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said that the German state can no longer finance the current system of social welfare provisions. Then the authorities of the country, following that, wanted to create the most powerful army in Europe. Maybe they forgot the lessons of history, as well as the statements of their own closest partner, Zelensky. He says he has the most powerful army in Europe, and it's a dead end. And the U.S. pushes the EU towards this dead end. The Mark Rutte, as a traveling agent, goes through Europe and trying to sell this militarization campaign to all the countries. He's trying to do everything in his power to push the European countries towards this edge. I'd like to quote the U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower, who knew firsthand what the real war was on April 16th, 1953, when giving a speech on he said, when giving his speech, A Chance for Peace, and I quote him, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, from those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children." The end of quote. I don't know who was the author of this quote, but it is truly an indicator that at that time the leaders of the Western world could establish teams to become history. Unlike the combat general, today's armchair strategists of the alliance don't care about the future of their peoples. When presenting the report, Mark Rutte underlined, and I quote him, "NATO today is more powerful than in any other point of time in the past. But one journalist asked him a question. The correspondent directly asked Mark Rutte about the dissonance between what has been done and what has been said in the report. The alliance includes the U.S., which, by the way, contributes its own potential into NATO. Moreover, they collect money from NATO countries, and they have increased the bids. What's happening in the Persian Gulf, well, to put it mildly, we all see what's happening there. The statements of the Secretary General are not convincing, taking into account what's happening in the transatlantic relations. They're navigating through a very dire crisis. It is a testament that not everything is rosy as it seems in the North Atlantic Alliance. Mark Rutte is pretending that all is well when things are going badly. Now over to the UN Security Council on March 27th during the 61st UN Security Council session where a draft was approved, the 60th anniversary since the Pacts on Human Rights were adopted. 38 countries were co-authored that. 21st countries abstained. There was no vote against this initiative. We wanted to reaffirm the viability and the relevance of the pact on civil and political rights, the 60th anniversary of which the world is celebrating this year. These foundational documents have become pillars of the universal mechanism of encouragement and protection of human rights, and the legal norms that were enshrined in these pacts provided the basis for the constitutions and national legislations of the overwhelming majority of the countries of the world. This anniversary of international covenants is a good opportunity to revisit in current conditions many aspects of international cooperation in human rights sector. For example, think about how we can truly provide the equal approach to all categories of human rights, and not only give priorities to civil and political rights, how to put ends to the practice of double standards and politicizing the activities of multilateral human rights protection structures. Regrettably, some countries are not being treated equally. We're talking about the lack of respect towards human rights. Regrettably, not all UN Security Council members supported this Russian initiative, not being able to overcome this geopolitical ambition. The delegation of Britain abstained from the Russian initiative, didn't want to vote, and said that it's not reasonable that Russia introduces, in the context of its human rights interpretation, any documents to the consideration of the Council. So Russia is not a member of the Human Rights Council, so it wasn't addressed to the U.S. because they're not members of the UN Human Rights Council. So London maybe thought that it has the right to decide who can put forth initiatives at the UN structures and who cannot. So if there are no United States present, you can do whatever you want, allegedly. The British still perceive the imperial phantom pains and still trying to overcome the remnants of their colonial thinking continues to divide all sovereign states into true democracies and delinquents, the so-called delinquents. The statements of the British side are nothing other than the open disregard for the UN Statute and Charter and the Declaration on International Law of 1970. They have demonstrated double standards as far as international human rights sector goes. Their rhetoric can only be used as an instrument to pursue their own notorious neo-colonial policies, and its own purpose is clear: to economically and politically contain the undesired governments. Against this backdrop, we see it as reasonable to attempt to derail the resolution. This document, however, was adopted by the UN Human Rights Council, including by those countries who are not part of the Council. The Russian document, and we're talking about September, October this year, provides for a thematic discussion of a high level that is dedicated to the universal, indivisible, and interdependent and interlinked nature of all human rights. We hope that this event will help to substantially, in detail, talk about the true purpose of human rights, where there's no place for confrontation or polarization on our part. We would like to genuinely thank the delegations that have demonstrated a constructive approach when harmonizing the text of the Russian draft, those countries who voted in favor of it and those who co-authored it. It is evident that the care for human rights for them is not just a political slogan or a meme that has gone viral and that is meant for consumption of external audience, but it is a very important state matter.
Another important event on March 30th and 31st, New York hosted an organizational session of the UN Global Mechanism on Developments in the field of ICTs in the context of international security and advancing responsible state behavior in the use of ICTs that was established in line with the UN General Assembly Resolution 80/16. The Global Mechanism's chair was elected with a mandate of 2 years, and it was the permanent representative of Salvador to the United Nations in New York, Griselda Lopez. Other procedural matters were discussed as well. Russia, as initiator of the negotiating process in international information security in the United Nations, welcomes the launch of the Global Mechanism as a central permanent platform to discuss all aspects of the international information security, and we reaffirm our commitment to active and constructive participation in the work of this structure. We intend to uphold our priority viewpoints to create conditions for the development of legally binding agreements in the interests of building a universal system of international information security, as well as to provide assistance to countries in national capacity building in the area of information security and to provide digital sovereignty. And another warning that we have for you: over the past years, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs have repeatedly drawn attention to the growing danger of detentions and arrests of Russian citizens by third countries at the request of American law enforcement agencies who launched a manhunt against our compatriots all over the world. Last week, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs called Russian citizens to stay vigilant due to the fact that security services of the United States use various fraudulent schemes to lure persons of interest out and to extradite them under the American jurisdiction. We have numerous cases which have surpassed the figure of 100, and taking that into account, our ministry has drafted a detailed alert notice describing potential dangers of visiting countries who entered into bilateral and/or multilateral extradition treaties with the United States, as well as dangers of making transits through their airports. We strongly recommend to have a look at this list of countries with a high risk of detentions under the arrest warrant issued by the U.S. Department of Justice, and these two documents will be published on the website of the Russian Foreign Ministry, and our diplomats are doing their best to help our compatriots, but again, we warn about the existing risks in advance. Well, Russia-Japan relations. We would like to have a different section at our briefing, but unfortunately, we have nothing to be proud of in terms of our bilateral relations due to the actions taken by official Japanese authorities. We have to comment what is going on in Japan, and that is connected to our country. We have received new information about war crimes committed by militaries Japan during the Great Patriotic War. These crimes have no statute of limitations, and procedural actions to bring all responsible to justice are ongoing. From January to March 2026, the Russian Prosecutor General's office has officially notified on adopting decrees which abolished earlier issued certificates that exonerated 28 Japanese citizens. You will find names in the transcript of the briefing. During the war, they participated in sabotage and espionage, and they also prepared bacteriological war against our country. Just as an example of war crimes, ruthless war crimes committed by the military of Japan from 1940 to 1943, there is one person from the infamous Unit 731 of the Kwantung Army who abducted civilians from the occupied territories and brought them to the unit to use them as guinea pigs in harrowing experience on living persons. Another Japanese national, a lab assistant in another unit, 100 of the same Kwantung Army, cultivated bacteria of glanders, which were used in August 1945 to infect horses of the Red Army who were moving toward the territory of Manchuria, as well as to spread epidemics on the territory of the Soviet Union. After reviewing the court decisions passed by the cassation instances and other court instances, we established that these persons cannot be exonerated and their fault was proven fully. We will continue the work to disclose and to publish information about the crimes committed by the military of Japan. Yet I have to continue to talk about Russia-Japan relations and what is going in Japan. We paid attention to the report published by the Japanese Ministry of Education and Science about the results of inquiry into the student books that will be used in Japanese schools since April 2027. In particular, as the document says, the revised students' books provides more information about territorial claims of Japan to Southern Kuril Islands, as well as territorial claims to other countries in the region. There is no mentioning of war crimes committed by the military of Japan in the first half of the 20th century. It clearly demonstrates that Japanese authorities want to raise a new generation in the spirit of revanchism, and they wanted to reject outcomes of the World War II. Japanese officials strive to erase shameful episodes of their history in the public mind, and they indiscriminately and hypocritically accuse other countries of expansionism. Extracts on the recent situation in Ukraine constitute yet another flagrant distortion of modern events. At the instigation of Japanese officials, the protection by our country of the Donbas population from annihilation by the pro-Nazi Kiev junta is described in student books, and please brace yourselves, is described in student books as Russian irredentism. What is irredentism? Irredentism is a policy to unite territories that are in the close vicinity to a country where lives a small ethnic group that constitutes a national ethnic minority of another country that is close or almost identical to people that form a majority in the state that wants to unite them with their territory. So again, what harmony could we talk about as part of a single country without people having rights to their own culture, language, and history? That's what they are calling as irredentism. In our return, we would like to say that the reckless Russophobic policy of Japan has a negative effect on bilateral relations and affects the most the interests of Japan and its people. That's how Japan and its authorities are harassing and abusing their own generations by confusing them about the current geopolitical realities. We would like to remind them that the sovereignty and jurisdiction of the Russian Federation of the Kuril Islands were cemented in the outcomes of the World War II, and they cannot be questioned. Those who want to rewrite history and to present it in a distorted form, we continue to talk about events to perpetuate the memory of victims of a genocide of the Soviet people that was committed by Nazis and their accomplices during the Great Patriotic War between 1941 and 1945. I need to recall that we are going to commemorate a new memorable date, April 19th. On the website of the Foreign Ministry, we created a special thematic section, the genocide of the Soviet people. You will find the web link in the transcript of the briefing. This section has materials and articles that were written by our partners from the National Center of Historic Memory to the President of the Russian Federation and Russian Military Historical Society. It also has historical materials that are linked to the project with no statutes of limitations, and to the portal historia.rf. We plan to regularly update this section and its subsections, and we are ready to translate key materials into a number of foreign languages. I would like to highlight that the Russian Ministry and Russian foreign missions make publications in social media accounts on the genocide of the Soviet people. In providing this information, we draw on the well-known facts as well as on the documents of the Great Patriotic War that were disclosed by the Federal Security Service and that were presented by the Russian Archive. These materials are reports, statements given by survivors, interrogation protocols of Nazi executioners. The National Center of the Historical Memory plans to organize several press tours to several countries of the region with the assistance of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Those are the regions that were under the Nazi occupation during the Great Patriotic War. The first memorial press tour will take place in the Pskov region from April 12th to 14th, 2026. In Pskov region, in the first days of occupation, Nazis were pursuing the policy of extermination. They carried out mass shootings and hanging of civilians and total extermination of prisoners of war in camps by starving and freezing them to death, by denying them medical assistance, by shooting the weakened prisoners of war, by carrying out punitive actions and deporting them to Germany for forced labor, and by carrying out medical experiments. Our people have suffered huge losses, and according to the Extraordinary State Committee, the post-war investigations and the project with no statute of limitations, at least 74,000 Soviet civilians were killed on the occupied territory, including 1,400 children, and more than 377,000 Soviet prisoners of war died in extermination camps, and more than 192,000 Pskov residents were deported for forced labor into Germany. It was officially recognized by the Pskov Regional Court in 2021, and this decision has become yet another important step towards the restoration of historical truth. And I'm only talking about the situation in the Pskov region. Participants of the press tour will be able to visit memorial complexes, memorial places, They will have a look at the places where fierce battles took place and heroic acts were committed by the Soviet people on the front lines and in the rear. They will meet with the archive. They will look at the archive documents who will describe atrocities of occupation and cruelty of Nazis. They will learn about the dedication of residents of the Pskov region. They will visit Kresty Hospital, Peski, Dulak 100, Polikova Meza, Derevnya Zapolyanie, Moglino, State Archive of the Pskov region, Military and Historical Museum. They will have meetings with historians, archivists, staff members of museums, search teams, and representatives of the investigative committee and the prosecutor's office of the region. Representatives of the Western mass media are quite well represented in the Russian Federation, and we'll see how ready are they to talk about the atrocities committed by Nazis in our territories and why the memory of the genocide committed against the Soviet citizens as not just pages of the past, but they are pages of history that connect our generations. The bilateral year of culture of Russia and China have finished recently, and they have provided they have updated the level of bilateral and humanitarian exchanges. They created new traditions and provided favorable conditions for enhancing cooperation in education. And one of the graphic examples to that is the opening of the Tchaikovsky Conservatory in Chunsin Normal University on March 19th. It is symbolic that it happened at the start of the Russia-China cooperation in the field of education that was declared in line with the decision of Russian and Chinese presidents. Well, China has its own musical tradition, but I'll repeat it time and again that Chinese people do not even think about canceling Tchaikovsky. They treat Tchaikovsky and world classics in general, not just as a person who was an eminent artist of our country. They view Tchaikovsky in a much broader way. They want to be part of a civilizational achievement that was reached by the humankind. Well, it's quite surprising if we remember that when Tchaikovsky was alive, the West named after his name many music halls and concert halls, but yet today the West is trying to cancel Tchaikovsky. That's how they are mocking history. Well, today the name of Tchaikovsky has become a part and parcel of the musical map of China. We welcome the spread of the well-known traditions of the Russian School of Musical Art in China. The Tchaikovsky Moscow State Conservatory has organized this important project and is one of the leading creative universities of the world. We hope that it will provide more opportunities to develop young Chinese talents. Conservatory will help them to improve their composing and performing skills, as well as to help to develop student exchanges and to enrich our cultures by strengthening friendship between our peoples. April 7th, 1948, the World Health Organization was established, so we are yet to commemorate another important date. The organization is trusted with coordinating state efforts in healthcare and addressing related global challenges. Today, in the context of new challenges of the spread of infectious and non-infectious diseases, the WHO plays a more prominent role, and we believe that it is of paramount importance to preserve a depoliticized and evidence-based nature of the WHO's work that should be conducted with due consideration given to interests of all member states. The Russian Federation is committed to make a significant contribution to enhancing multilateral cooperation and to improving global healthcare architecture relying on principles of fairness, mutual respect, and equality. We call to strictly observe the WHO Constitution, to foster an atmosphere of trust and openness in the WHO's work, to renounce double standards and to effectively use its opportunities to develop national healthcare systems and to improve health of all people of the planet. And again, quite an important announcement for tomorrow. We have told you what's going to happen tomorrow. April 2nd, 10 a.m. Mia Segodnya, Zubovsky Boulevard. We will hold an opening ceremony that will be dedicated to Valentin Falin, that will commemorate 100th anniversary of this state official, diplomat, international journalist, researcher, and publicist. You will find more details about his personality in the transcript of the briefing, and you will find there all the necessary web links to get accreditation for journalists. Again, you will find all the information in the transcript of the briefing. Now I'm ready to answer your question. International Life, please.
Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Last year, in late 2025, a Russian citizen, Anna Novikova, was detained in France. She was charged with espionage. According to the information that is at hand now, she is now held in a female's prison in Fleury, close to Paris. What does Russian side do to help her? We have regularly commented the situation around Anna Novikova. In November 2025, French law enforcement bodies, under a false pretext, and I'll read it to you, detained and put Anna Novikova, a citizen of Russia, to Paris prison, Fleury-Mérogis. She was the founder of Association SOS Donbass. She was charged with cooperation with a foreign state and with collecting information in its interest and in connivance in order to commit a crime. Since her detention, Russian diplomats in France keep in touch with her French lawyers and help her with all that is necessary. That case is another example of spy hysteria, Russophobic spy hysteria that has engulfed France and other countries. Freedom of speech, freedom of expressions, they have not heard about it. It is evident that the French authorities have come up with the pretext to detain our citizen. It has nothing to do with the reality, with justice. We don't have any doubts that the true reason was her civic position, because she was a very active part of the civil society. That's the true reason of these unlawful, unfounded, unsubstantiated actions with regard to Anna Novikova. What did she do, Anna Novikova? She communicated to the French public the facts about the situation in Donbass. For example, she collected donations, dispatched humanitarian aid to the DPR and LNR residents, And we are convinced that she didn't commit any crimes that the punitive law enforcement bodies of France have come up with. Let me tell you again, I've familiarized myself with this information. It just so happens that some citizens of ours commit crimes in different countries. Of course, we assist them in defending themselves, but we don't always say that they were right in doing so. Our task is to give it an assessment, to conduct an in-depth analysis of what happened. We looked at the situation. I can tell you the following. What we saw was her frank ambition to help people that since 2014 have been in need to get this help and to attract attention from the world, because the Western community used their names when they were imposing sanctions on Russia or taking any anti-Russian steps, or even when they were acting against the EU community. They were motivating it by acting in Ukraine's interests, but nobody took notice of that. They were even prohibited in receiving a visa. They were banned from visiting the EU, from connecting to online conferences that focused on the future of their own country, of their homeland. Anna Novikova enlightened the communities on that, focused on people who suffered from Ukrainian neo-Nazis. That was exactly what irritated the official Paris that stands behind the criminal Kiev regime and continues to fuel the Ukrainian conflict. We call upon the French authorities to immediately release Anna Novikova. We insist that they should immediately stop repressions against those people who exercise the freedom of speech and made statements that run counter to the official position of France. We should hear the people who, using their own words, tell us the truth about the developments in Ukraine and the truth that they see with regard to different countries that have suffered from the Kiev regime, people who have their own standpoints regarding the root causes of the conflict and what is really happening there and who is to blame for everything that has occurred so far. People who use facts explain the dire consequences of a short-sighted policies against the Russian Federation. We hope that the French authorities will follow their obligations in ensuring the laws are being observed, and we hope that they exercise a progressive approach to release Anna Novikova as soon as possible. Thank you very much. I remember the pretext that was used to detain, arrest, and torture Maria Butina in the U.S. Remember, it was under the Biden administration. Remember, they told us, you just made everything up. She allegedly violated the laws of the U.S. Nobody could understand anything. What laws did she violate? What was what was the violation? And there was a letter which read, let's become friends and establish humanitarian contacts so that the two countries do not fall into the abyss of confrontation. I think that it is not what political activists are writing about. These are the opinion of just rank-and-file citizens that want peace on the planet. That was exactly why she was charged with this actions. When Maria Butina came home, she told us what they did to her, how they tortured her, and then a feature film was made and her book was published featuring documentary evidence of what had happened to her. And then we saw the lawlessness that was happening under the Biden administration. Americans witnessing these events said that it was them personally who participated in this smear campaigns and other actions, and how this story unfolded. And now we know the truth about Maria Butina and what was done to her and what she lived through. And we know now that it has nothing to do with the FARA Law Act. It was just about harassing a person who had done nothing wrong, just said, let's now help our countries to establish friendly relations. That was it. And that's why she was tortured, but she was able to survive. And now she started helping others. First and foremost, our compatriots. She is now helping our citizens and our compatriots who have found themselves in a bad situation, and they were accused of different things that they have not done, and they have become subject of harassment on the part of Western countries by the punitive democracies. If you don't have any other questions, let us move on. Is RIA Novosti with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Christina Rodriguez, allow us to ask 2 questions. Good afternoon, please. You can ask even more questions if you'd like. First question is, how does Moscow assess the Zelensky statement on the fact that Ukraine is ready to engage in a ceasefire agreement during Easter? Is it realistic? It's a PR campaign that Zelensky often uses. Zelensky needs it not as a stepping stone towards a long-lasting peace. It's just a step in a campaign launched by its Western sponsors to reach a ceasefire, a 1 or 2 month ceasefire, in order to be able to regroup and prepare the AFU to continue the hostilities. And we have seen a lot of indicators of that. If Zelensky were really interested in the end of the conflict, he would now show the political will and will stop discriminating Russian and Russian-speaking parts of population of Ukraine, thus underlining the seriousness of his intentions and contributing to the end of the crisis. But we don't hear that. We see just the henchmen of Bankova who are doing the reverse, and Zelensky himself has been saying the only thing. The belligerent rhetoric and calls upon everyone to kill at least 50,000 servicemen, Russian servicemen, monthly. The Kiev regime has many times proved itself as a party that is unable to strike deals. In word, Zelensky supported the U.S. initiative to put a moratorium on strikes on energy infrastructure in Russia and Ukraine, but indeed he allowed the AFU to violate this energy ceasefire 136 times. That's his true essence. But I can reiterate that Zelensky did the same when reacting to a ceasefire initiative that Russian President Vladimir Putin put forth last year during Easter. Back then, Russia recorded a couple thousand violations of this regime on the part of Ukraine. That was the response that he gave. Thank you. Allow me to ask you the second question. We see the current escalation in the Middle East. Representatives of the UN Secretariat actively comment attacks on synagogues in a number of countries in Europe. But at the same time, we don't remember any similar reaction when attacks against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church happened in Kiev. If you look at Ukraine, you can see daily attacks against believers, attacks against churches, repressions against priests that criticize the policies of Zelensky. I'd like to know how you evaluate and assess the policies pursued by the UN Secretariat. They keep silent with regard to what's happening in Ukraine. I'd like to see what Russia is doing exactly to encourage Secretary General to respond to what's happening and to raise this question at the UN. I'd like to say that attacks against synagogues and other places of worship are unacceptable, and what has happened raises concerns. We condemn any manifestations of religious intolerance, and we condemn all acts of violence against worshippers, places of worship, regardless of where they take place and regardless of what the religion is. Such crimes should, of course, regularly receive an assessment on the part of the international community, and they should be investigated at the national level. There exist relevant units at international organizations, institutions within these multilateral structures whose only job is to research the dialogue between civilizations, freedom of faith. They conduct reviews on how countries adhere to international norms. So I have another question that comes to mind. Is it only Russia that condemns attacks against places of worship, regardless of the religion? It turns out that the UN Secretariat acts within the bounds of a different paradigm. Of course, we have noted these statements by the UN. Antonio Guterres said, and I quote him, that the UN directly condemns attacks in different countries and calls upon providing the protection of all places of worship and acts against any manifestation of hate. Would only Russia call upon others to ensure protection against such attacks? Or is there no one else that would do would make same statements? As you said, the UN Secretariat does not react in the same vein with regard to similar attacks to Orthodox churches, monasteries, church schools. We're talking about rewriting history, torturing priests, desecrating holy places and artifacts. There were two statements by the Russian Foreign Ministry on how Ukraine violates the rights of worshippers. And the main focus of this statement is on what is being done to the churches and their heads. Where is the UN Secretariat? Why is it not commenting on that? We have already prepared 2 reports, and we are now working on the 3rd one. Where is the Secretary General when it comes to responding to such acts against Orthodox churches in Ukraine? We see concern with regard to one group of places of worship, and at the same time, we don't see anything, total inactivity on the part of the leadership when it comes to systematic disregard towards the violations against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We see acts of anti-humanism, which Western community cares so much about. Priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church are being tortured, interrogated. The Ukrainian regime forces them to abandon the wrong version of orthodoxy. These people were not loyal to any religion, and they are now talking about the wrong religion. They're being beaten. Churches have been desecrated, raided. In late January, nuns of a Ukrainian monastery were evicted from their abodes and the doors were sealed.
The so-called Assumption Church of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was seized, and again, people and believers were not allowed to visit these places. And some officials are being accused of inciting religious hatred when they speak bad things about Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Searches are being conducted. Clergy are being arrested for treason. They are stripped of nationality. It doesn't matter what age, how old they are. The Kiev regime doesn't stop at that. It's no different to them. They continue politically motivated persecutions that turn into reprisals. They want to take control of the sacred place, the Kiev Pechers Klora, but they're trying to desecrate it. Well, Ukrainian courts, you know how they are working and what Ukrainian courts are about, have adopted a decree that will strip the clergy of their residence. I repeat, we have published 2 reports about that, and we circulated these reports in international organizations. Ukraine has launched a campaign against Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and it has been persecuting the clergy and Christian community for years. They want to replace it with pseudo-religious surrogate of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. We remember the political project that has nothing to do with religion. We remember how this issue was created. It was artificially created in 2018, and it was accompanied by a scandal that resulted into a schism in the Christian community. The officials of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine are inciting hatred, but as far as we can see, their attempts to recruit followers by force to present the church as the national church are doomed to failure, because people understand where true values and true religion are, and where there are flagrant attempts to distort. You probably remember that they were organizing cooking shows in the churches that they seized week before the Easter during the Christian Lent, how they were organizing pagan rituals in the church with the horns in their hands and with the hoofs in their hands. Following this ethnic policy, they called this church an anomaly that has no place in Ukraine. That just goes according to Bulgakov, and they have a pseudo-legal basis for that. There is just another example that another law that entered into force on the religious organization that has created legal mechanisms to ban the functioning of any religious association that is affiliated with the centers of Russian influence. The Kiev regime has provided legal grounds for itself to ban the church that they hate. We understand that it has nothing to do with religion, it has nothing to do with politics. This is madness of the Kiev regime. They are not just fighting against unwanted denomination. They want to rewrite their own true popular and to turn it into something foreign. They want to turn good into evil. And they paint with the same brush everyone else. You probably remember that this process started long before. They have become stronger since 2014, and it has been launched at an accelerated pace. And they did all that to fight against separatism and Kremlin propaganda. And they started to prosecute everyone, unwanted journalists, political opponents. Those journalists who were independent and who were tried to be unbiased in their work, they prosecuted companies that weren't wanted by authorities, clergy. Russophobia is the part of the Ukrainian DNA. That's why they are annihilating everything that could be linked to Russian language, culture, religion. Russian language is a native language for a large part of the Ukrainian population that for centuries has been in cultural unity with Russia. And this policy pursued by the Kiev regime means annihilation of part of its population and society. I don't think that UN officials are concerned about it, because I cannot see that any religious site, because it's our principled position, you can find numerous materials that we have developed on this topic, and you will understand the attention that we have been paying to the rise of anti-Semitism in the world. We have been championing for Islam that, again, is distorted and is facing with persecutions and provocations. Why we cared so much about the dialogue of civilizations, the format that existed earlier, but we see that a large denomination and religious communities being persecuted by Ukraine, but UN officials turn a blind eye to it. And I'm referring to the UN Secretary General. I'm talking about the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. They haven't expressed their position with regard to the situation that is unfolding around the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Overall, this is the manifestation of double standards, but it's annihilation of any standards if we follow their actions. When we're talking about the situation around in Ukraine, they just follow the mantra of Western countries. It's a different thing. We're actively using the UN platform to tell the wider public about the situation with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in 2023. In the peak of persecutions, we have organized a number of UN Security Council sessions. We have organized a RIA formula informal session on the situation with the freedom of religion in Ukraine. We will continue these efforts and take into account how complicated this issue is to make sure that it's understood by UN member states that are far from this religious space. And all these years we're trying to bring this situation to the attention of UN officials by demanding from them both in spoken and written forms to show a proper reaction, but unfortunately they avoid giving any response to that. But that's why the United Nations was created, but they prefer to avoid the situation. We insist on the principle of indismissibility of discrimination against religion, and this principle should be applied universally. The international community cannot ignore systemic violations of rights of Christian communities like the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We are looking forward to not just vague response from the UN Secretariat, but to condemn in the strongest possible terms persecutions that are being committed against the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church that is launched by the Kiev regime, and the Kiev regime doesn't even hide that they're persecuting the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. That's why we wait for the United Nations to make a call to guarantee rights of all religious communities of Ukraine, the right to the freedom of religion without being persecuted. If we are talking about persecutions of other religious movements and currents, well, obviously we should respond to them, but it's impossible just to stay silent when the whole situation is taking place, because the UN Secretariat is ignoring it. Thank you. What about third question? Well, probably next time. Thank you. Interfax, please. Yes. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have a question. Iranian officials have recently made statements about withdrawal from the NPT. Probably we had some contacts with Iran on that issue. Yes, we are aware of the statements made by the official representative of the Iranian Foreign Ministry. We have heard the statements. We understand their motives and reasons. The unprovoked and illegal attack by the US and Israel on Iran under the pretext of a non-proliferation regime has dealt a heavy blow to the system of international law at large and to the international nuclear non-proliferation regime in particular. Once again, non-proliferation narrative was used to justify interference in domestic affairs of Iran and in attempt to destroy an unwanted country. There, it is obvious that these objectives have nothing to do with the nuclear non-proliferation and with the observance of the NPT. Such cynical and unbridled use of force under far-fetched pretexts will lead to the understanding by countries of the regions and by countries of the entire world the need to acquire such types of weapons that will help to protect them from the potential aggression, and that might play a harmful role for international non-proliferation regime of weapons of mass destruction. Adversaries of Iran that inevitably will be held accountable for their actions have made everything possible, and they are doing that not for the first time, to incite and inflate discussions in the Iranian society about that. At the same time, Tehran has always been committed to its obligations under the treaty, and Iran continued its dialogue with the IAEA, and he has been looking for negotiated solutions that will allow to address Western prejudice and unjustified suspicion with regard to its national nuclear program. And it seems that the United States are trying to to annihilate the existing international legal regime, including in the field of non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms control. And consequences of that will be quite devastating for the Americans as well. Izvestia Anna Rakhmanova. We have three questions, if you allow. First, Donald Trump stated that if he fails to make a deal with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz would be closed for business, then American military will destroy all Iranian energy facilities, which will lead to high energy prices. Has Russia discussed with OPEC plus partners possible consequences of such threats to the international oil market stability? Overall, we have been touched on that issue on numerous occasions. Our country works with other oil exporting countries in the OPEC plus that was established during the energy crisis in 2016 after signing a treaty of cooperation between OPEC countries and 11 independent oil producers. Over the past 10 years since the establishment of OPEC+, this platform has played a key role in ensuring a global energy security and oil market stability. This voluntary adjustments in oil quotas will allow to sustain quotas at an acceptable level, given the geopolitical challenges that are still existing. In the interest to control the implementation of these agreements on the regular basis, the Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee and ministerial meetings are organized where Russia acts as a co-chair. There is a group of 8 countries that also has regular meetings since 2023. They have committed to make additional voluntary adjustments to oil production. It is obvious that since the 64th Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee on February 1st and since the meeting of 8 countries on March 1st, the situation has degraded substantively, and the ongoing conflict has led to the significant decrease in oil supply, and it has caused a peak of oil prices. We believe that it will become a central topic of the 65th GMMC that will take place on April 5th. The EU extended restrictive measures against Iran because of human rights violations until April 13th, 2027. What does Russia think about EU's decision to extend sanctions against Iran? What are the consequences for Russia-Iran relations, and does Brussels attempt to block opportunities for constructive dialogue with Tehran? The EU actions in the Middle East have recently been characterized by extreme inconsistency and inability to offer constructive solutions. They are caused by not just strategic vision, but their domestic political dynamic and international unexplainable logic, something that cannot be explained by logic, science, and it is driven by international opportunism. EU countries have made responsible all those who fell victims to the situation. I can't say that they made any contribution to the settlement process, but I cannot use the word settlement because the only way I can describe this situation in the Middle East as escalation. They use their favorable tool set, the only tool set that they have, and they believe that this tool set could be used for all problems, and this tool set include unilateral restrictive measures that are illegitimate from the point of view of international law and that undermine prerogatives of the UN Security Council. It's like a story that they are trying to break anything, like microsurgery, dentistry, arts, education, construction, animal husbandry, chemistry. They have only one tool for that, which is a metal crowbar. Sanctions pressure on sovereign states cannot be used as an alternative to diplomacy and won't help to normalize the situation in the Middle East and in other parts of the world as well. Such reaction of Brussels confirms that it follows a destructive policy in the region, and it shows its biased attitude towards Tehran, as well as their desire to instrumentalize the issue of human rights. They want to use false narratives to cover their errors, mistakes, and failures. Everyone is to blame, but not them.
Thank you very much. Another question. EU sanctions and differences within the European Union, how the sanctions fatigue is reflected on our bilateral conflicts Russia and the EU. What contacts are we talking about? Do we have any relations? Of course, we have embassies operating in these countries, but they often deport our diplomats and require closures of our diplomatic embassies. We have diplomatic relations with Hungary, Slovakia, and we have rare contacts with certain diplomats. They banned themselves from engaging with Russian representatives. Even prior to 2014 and 2022, they did everything to complicate visa issuance mechanisms. Now add to that the movements of people, of our diplomats for humanitarian ends. They banned transport, movement, aviation transport between our countries. Now everyone should take a detour, despite the fact that people have to resolve their problems. They impose sanctions, blocking the trade turnover. They also blocked the exchange of goods and services. They blocked payment services to portal journalists. What are we talking about? What kind of bilateral relations do we have? So now let us not focus on bilaterals, but on something else, on the consequences that they can perceive now from their own actions, because Brussels fully perceives their consequences from its own sanctions. The refusal to mutually beneficially cooperate with our country resulted in economic crisis. 2025 manufacturing sector has been on the decline. The chemical industry, automobile industry. Now the European companies have to pay twice as much as they used to pay, 4 times as much as they used to pay. Now they're paying to American companies. Now, when somebody is saying on their behalf, you'll have problems as well. Wait a minute. Now, the problems that the European Union is now facing were not created by Russia. They were created by the European Union. We're seeing these indicators not because somebody introduced some measures against them. It was like a boomerang effect following their unreasonable, unlawful actions. And they have unleashed a hybrid trade and sanctions war against our country. So you cannot compare these two things. Moreover, what they do, they encourage other countries to not engage in trade relations with us. But it's ludicrous, especially now, taking into account the energy crisis that they're now navigating. And that's the direct outcome of their actions. It all has been exacerbated by the crisis in the Middle East. We see grievances with regard to the sanctions policies against our country. Within the European Union, many decisions now take longer time to be adopted. You know, the 20th package of sanctions has not been adopted yet. So one would like to believe that sooner or later they will understand that it's going to end in a failure, and European capitals will start thinking about establishing constructive relations beyond their borders. And it doesn't only refer to our country. The sanctions policy is the only tool that they use. They have to get better, and they can use different tools to cooperate with other countries. They can use different tools, not only the sanctions tool. The other day, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that when these ties are restored, we will only support that. but that's their issue that they have to face themselves. Thank you very much. TV BRICS. Next. Hello, Madam Zakharova. My name is Alina Pantileva, editor of the TV BRICS channel. The creation of the International Organization for the Russian Language has become an important step in promoting the Russian language abroad. Now this organization comprises Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. At the same time, this organization is open for other countries to join. What prospects of promoting the Russian language you can see within the BRICS bloc? And is it possible to include media projects aimed at foreign audiences into this systematic work to promote the Russian language? And is it even discussed as part of the integration processes of the organization? The strengthening of the positions of the Russian language abroad is one of the priorities of the Russian foreign policies. Why? Because it's natural as dozens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people use the Russian language as their mother tongue. Russian is their tool for communicating, for talking to each other. The Russian language is one of the official languages of the UN and other international organizations. The BRICS format is unique. That's why the work is being conducted in a wider context. We focus on the development of our cultural cooperation in all its entirety, and we are trying to strengthen the atmosphere of friendship and cooperation between our peoples. We have done a lot on this track, and during our chairship we've done a lot. We did a lot in 2024 when we organized dozens of substantive events that contributed to other people familiarizing themselves with the rich culture of our country with the Russian language. But the climax of the chairship was the BRICS Festival of Culture that took place in St. Petersburg in July 2024, when Brazil was the chair in BRICS. Two Russian feature films were represented during the BRICS Movie Festival. That was another contribution to promoting the Russian language and domestic achievements in culture. We are systematically monitoring the state and the standing of the Russian language in BRICS states using the information from our foreign missions and expert sociological surveys and statistical information. We see this interest in these countries towards learning the Russian language, and we see economic and scientific interaction, bilateral interaction with our BRICS partners, and we see the true interest towards learning of the Russian language. The Russian houses expand their activities, and multiple projects are being successfully implemented, conferences being held, and artistic evenings are also being held, and you know all well about that. And the youth chooses the Russian language to learn as a foreign language because it expands their career opportunities. On our part, we support and coordinate the systematic work of federal bodies of the executive power to promote the Russian language in BRICS countries by implementing flagship projects in educational, scientific, cultural, humanitarian, and informational sectors. We use a wide range of tools and use different formats, and of course we take into account regional unique situation. In 2024, Brazil hosted a number of events, lectures, workshops, concerts with the participation of Russian teams and solo singers. And of course, this serves as a tool to attract the foreign audiences towards our treasure trove of culture, the cultural heritage of Russia. In 2025, under the aegis of the International Association of the Russian Language and Literature Teachers in Brazil, the International Forum of Russian Language Teachers in the Latin American countries took place. I think it bears a beautiful name. Many people think so as well. It was called Terra Russistica. This event became a large discussion platform of Russian language specialists from the region. It brought together over 100 scientists from different countries of Latin America. Another example, of media projects that are aimed at foreign audiences and promoting the Russian language. In 2025, video footages were published that promote the Russian language, the key achievements of our domestic education, science, culture, and tourism potential of our country. The video footages were prepared in our leading Russian universities that are conducting the educational programs for foreign citizens. The footages were published on the internet and were broadcast for BRICS audiences. And for many years now, the Russian World Foundation has been contributing considerably to educational programs in all countries of the bloc, and contributes to the Russian language media outlets and to useful initiatives in expanding and promoting the Russian-speaking communities. It helps the public and non-commercial organizations, professional, national, also associations of teachers who engage in promoting the Russian language. They also help to develop educational programs that promote the Russian culture and its history. The ministry also helps the foundation by creating institutional frameworks to strengthen the standing of the Russian language within the BRIC states. We believe that the Russian language is a very important tool for the global information interaction and an omnipotent promulgation of knowledge. I'd also like to note that the foundation has established cooperation with your channel as part of the flagship project, the 17th Assembly of the Russian World. In 2025, in partnership with TV BRICS, a thematic platform was established. It was called the New Media Space, the expansion of the dialogue. It brought together participants of from more than 40 countries, including representatives from Brazil, Egypt, Zimbabwe, Indonesia, Iran, Malaysia, Oman, Ethiopia, and South Africa. The representatives discussed the shaping of a new information landscape and the role of social media in the global south, including BRICS states. In the the final resolution of the Assembly, it was emphasized that the BRICS countries that represent almost the half of the world's population have a unique cultural and historical richness that should be reflected in global narratives through the creation of a unified single media space. And this space, and its aim is to expand the range of opinions and to contribute to the plurality of opinions. And I think that your channel plays a very important role in this regard. Thank you very much. Do we have Sputnik Armenia with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We have two questions. Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, recently said that considers transferring the concession of South Caucasian Railroad to the Kazakhstani side, and this issue will also be discussed during his meeting with Vladimir Putin today. My question is, as of now, is there any understanding on how long this will take to conduct contacts at the highest level, and is it acceptable to Russia to transfer this concession to the Kazakhstani side? I'd like to say that on March 30th, Andrei Nikitin, Minister for Transport of Russia, said that Moscow does not hold negotiations with regard to the transfer of railroad to Kazakhstan, neither with Armenia nor with Kazakhstan. One should take that into account. The corresponding agency has made this statement, and one should consider it to be important. And the concession agreement was signed in 2008, and it is going to be effective for 30 years, and it can be extended for another 10 years. The South Caucasian Railroad has been responsibly fulfilling the provisions of this agreement, and the Russian investments have amounted to over 30 billion rubles. As far as top negotiations go, you should please turn to the to the Presidential Executive Office. There are now reports that the Armenian delegation visiting Moscow will include Foreign Minister Arat Mirzayan. He said recently that he would consider looking at Russian experience when it comes to countering hybrid threats. What can you propose in terms of that, and can this issue be discussed during today's contacts? Without talking about today's negotiations, which take place at the top level, you should address this question to the Presidential Executive Office. So everything will be discussed in detail through appropriate channels. Russia has a vast number of opportunities, and to talk today about our steps at the UN. We're talking about international legal norms and best practices when it comes to combating cyber threats. If you talk more specifically about what Russia can offer, can propose, so if you talk in more detail, I would certainly address this issue during our next briefing, where I'll personally respond to you. Arat Mirzayan had a speech in the parliament, and when talking about the hybrid threat, he was asked by one of the journalists about that, and Arat Mirzayan answered that Russia can propose its best practices, and we will consider them. That's what he said. We have seen numerous attempts to quote these statements, but when translated, I think it was slightly distorted. If there is interest on both sides, and there is a need on both sides, we are ready to respond. As far as our opportunities go, one should specify what they're interested in. Is it protection of information? Is it combating cyber fraud? Or maybe it is about cooperation at international platforms. We are ready to share our expert opinion and to cooperate on a number of areas. This is why we have different departments at the Foreign Ministry, the Department of International Information Security, and we have a number of agencies that cope with cyber threats. That's their expertise. So if our Armenian colleagues show interest in that, we are always open to a dialogue, either through our foreign ministries or through our experts in different areas that our partners, friends, and colleagues find the most interesting. Thank you. Do we have China Media Corporation? Hello, Madam Zakharova, we have one question. In late March, land forces of Japan said that they would deploy long-range missiles in Kumamoto, in Shizuoka region. We're talking about the range of 1,000 kilometers and hypersound armaments. So the enemy will be able to strike the military bases of the enemy. For many years, Japan has been violating the principle of the defense defense. I would agree that Japan has violated its own constitution, so to speak, the provisions of its constitutions. The deployment on its territory of missile systems and increasing their strike arsenals all present the steps that are part of remilitarization campaign of Japan. Add to that the preservation of historical memory and the process of rewriting history. You'll see a tragic outcome. Earlier, we have noted the direct consequences of this policies and instability in the region, including it affects the interests of our country. And of course, we take into account this situation in order to take countermeasures to provide to ensure security and safety of other countries. Do we have Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We have a question to you concerns Cuba. The other day, the U.S. permitted the Russian tanker transporting humanitarian aid to deliver it to the island, but then later on they said that these actions do not reflect the change in the policies with regard to the blockade of the isle. Does Russia think that it is reasonable to ask each and every time the permission to help one of its traditional allies? It's a situation that we could have not imagined during the USSR, or Russia would provide assistance to Habana in any case whatsoever, despite the positions of Washington. Well, you put this question in a way in a very interesting way, but we have always provided help to Cuba, and the U.S. have always held Cuba in blockade, and countries that are friends with Cuba have always been talking about the need of lifting this blockade, and have always done so that Cuba, despite this American blockade, could receive what it needs. Nothing has changed so far. Just look at the General Assembly resolution. Look how many times Russia raised this issue at international platforms. We have required to lift the blockade against a sovereign state that suffers from the lack of goods and commodities that they need. We're talking about medicines, food, fuels. We're talking about the people that European countries and the U.S. care so much about. So it's not that it just emerged yesterday. Cuba is our friend in the Caribbean. I can only reaffirm that we stand in solidarity with the government of Cuba and its people. Our relations with this island have a long time friendly nature. From time immemorial, we've provided help to our Cuban friends. Different situations, we've seen different situations, and I should not remind you of what those situations were like.
It's not just we were asked to do that. The world was on the brink of the nuclear war. If you remember the Caribbean crisis, you remember how it started. Well, you probably forgot that, but Reuters cannot forget that, actually. As for our contacts with the United States, I think commentary has already been provided by the Presidential Executive Office, so I see no point to return to this issue again. Thank you. News.ru, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have two questions for you. First, on March 29th in Islamabad, 4 countries discussed the establishment of a consortium to govern oil supplies through the Strait of Hormuz, including Egypt, Pakistan, and other 2 countries. There are different options on the table, including the payment for passing through the Strait of Hormuz. That was one of the proposals made by Iranian authorities. What's your position on this format, in particular participation of countries that have nothing to do with the Strait of Hormuz from a geographic point of view? Any initiatives with regard to navigation through the Strait of Hormuz should be based on consensus reached by coastal states. Providing a control to third countries or providing supranational structures wouldn't help to address the tensions in the region, and these actions would go against norms of international law. I would like to recall, probably everyone remembers, that the Strait of Hormuz is 20 nautical miles wide. It means that you cannot go through it without entering territorial waters of Iran or Oman, which have sovereignty over this water. So we have no information about the legal constructs that would allow to provide water areas without the approval of Iran that are part of the territorial waters and provided under the control of the other states. I think other countries, including the US, cannot doubt that the fact that the passage through the Strait of Hormuz is controlled by Tehran. Iranian positions and should be taken into account, and Iran should be directly involved in this negotiating process. The extreme position of the commercial fleet and vulnerability of the commercial fleet doesn't allow us to be sure that this situation will change in the near future. It is impossible to ensure the long-term normalization. It's impossible to reach that without normalizing situation in Iran for the long term. Taking into account the situation in energy markets, EU officials continue to completely phase out Russian oil and gas. What could be the possible consequences for that? And if there is any opportunity to reach an agreement? So it's just a very dangerous trick. There is a joke. Have you seen the trick? No, I haven't seen the trick in the circus. That's the trick that they are doing. Everyone all over the world think about obtaining more and more resources. Everyone thinks about buying oil and gas at a predictable price and with an easy logistics, but only the European Union continues to eat the cactus. But I would like to call that EU deliberately pursues the policy of the phase-out of Russian oil and gas. That's the policy pursued by the European Commission. That's the madness that they have been responsible for so many years. They have actually proposed a roadmap that, well, probably will lead them to the abyss. That will include the phase-out of the Russian LNG exports into Europe, but they probably noticed that Russian energy resources are supplied to other countries of the world. They are obtained by other countries, and they cannot just ignore the current situation with oil and gas markets, and they can't just ignore the current geopolitical situation. But they have killed the desire and even the skill to see that. In line with all these documents and roadmaps, in November 2027, the Russian oil and gas should be completely phased out. Probably they will create another performance, another show, because they need to celebrate it. The European Commission has developed another document, and you won't believe it, about the Russian oil, and they plan to ban oil supplies till the end of 2027. I'm not sure whether they're going to have another show or another concert, or they will organize it all together, but they need something to organize, because, again, it's a momentous decision for them that will lead the EU to the bottom of the barrel. Well, but just don't tell them it's our small secret. EU has paid 6 billion euros for buying oil and gas. But according to Ursula von der Leyen, the chief of the European Commission, in the middle of March, it was noticed that even the current crisis isn't a reason to return to the normal energy cooperation with our country. Well, it's not to me to ask the question. Well, it's up to the journalist to ask that question. What could help to return to the normal energy cooperation with our country? But there are not enough brave journalists to ask that question. Well, there are vague prospects, and the conflict in the Middle East has been ongoing for 2 months, and there are no prospects for its end. And energy infrastructure of countries of the Persian Gulf were already attacked, and navigation was disrupted in the Strait of Hormuz. And several days ago, we have learned about the initiative of a number of countries to create a consortium to govern this transport artery like they did with the Suez Canal. But we need reliable sources of oil and gas supplies. But Ursula von der Leyen continues to say it like mantra. This situation reflects a structural transformation of the global energy architecture that is being carried out in the context of the energy crisis that is raging in the world. European bureaucrats will continue to go to the bottom of the barrel and to the abyss. Well, and to speak in diplomatic terms, they will continue to ruin their economies for political gains. The energy sector of European countries has responded to the escalation of situation in the Middle East. The gas prices have already increased by 85%, oil prices by 54%, petrol by 44%, and diesel by 42%. And as for the Brent price, it is at the level of $100 per barrel, and as for gas, it is about $600-700 per 1,000 cubic meters. That leads to rising prices on fuel, and it has an effect on the income of EU citizens that make governments to take measures to mitigate consequences of the crisis. Well, people have not to take showers, not to turn on their air conditioners, not to go outside. Well, it would sound funny if it wouldn't be so sad, because such measures deal a heavy blow on individuals and businesses. There is quite an important issue for Europe, which is to replenish their underground gas storages for the heating seasons. This cold winter led to quite a high depletion of gas from their underground gas storage, and Europe hit a record in terms of the LNG imports in 67 billion cubic meters. Well, it will be a serious burden on their budgets, on the budgets of the European countries. And it will lead to the decrease in the limit of replenishment for the underground gas storages from 90 to 65%, and it won't help the situation. Well, again, I recall the citizens will be asked not to take showers, not to turn on lights, and not to go outside. They will have to take austerity measures, and it's not the part of the green transition. Green transition, it's a dirty transition. That's the strategy that is pursued by the European Union. Well, people in the European Union call it a crisis and a recession. Well, if they're brave enough, and if they are not brave enough, they use other ways to describe the situation. They are not calling it a recession. They are calling it an other way. But I'm not sure that it will help them to deal with the challenges they faced with. EU takes decisions that are not evidence-based, and they have nationalist, if not Nazi, motives. And Russophobia also takes its toll on their mental state. Russia is ready to work with partners that are not prone to politicize energy security. These approaches were described again by the Russian President Vladimir Putin on March 9th during his meeting with the government, where they discussed the situation of the oil and gas global markets. We have faced with many situations in our country. For decades we had geopolitical turbulences, and Russia has never violated its obligations in terms of oil and gas supplies. We have always fulfilled our commitments in terms of contracts that were signed with our partners. We have never endangered energy security. We have never made it dependent on political tensions or political situation. Our country has always been open to concerns, to outstanding matters that were raised by the European Union in the past. And at their request, we have reached mutually acceptable, mutually beneficial solutions. We need to ensure the reliable market operation, and we need to ensure that consumers are reliable and demand is stable from the point of view of the EU, but I'm not sure that the EU leadership will accept these solutions. Saga, please. Well, I see that our colleagues... Excuse me, we cannot hear you. Saga Radio. I would like to speak about the Middle East. Since we have a representative of Al-Mayadeen, I would like to offer my condolences, to express my solidarity, since 3 journalists of Al-Mayadeen died. They were in a car and they were providing information. We are part of the Association of International Journalists, and such news is important. How the Russian Foreign Ministry responded to the decision of the Israeli police to restrict access for the high-ranking representatives of the Catholic Church to the Holy Sepulchre Church in Jerusalem in the Palm Sunday. We are afraid that the same might happen with the representatives of the Orthodox Church in a week. We understand that Easter is an important religious holiday for Orthodox Christians. Well, you have probably guessed that I have a lot to say about it, but this issue is very sensitive, especially if we take into account the fact that there is a combination of facts: respect for traditional religions and ensuring security. I wouldn't like to comment that issue in greater detail. As for the statement, we'll make the statement later. We continue to work with our partners. The Israeli side has provided strong guarantees of organizing the ceremony that is dedicated to the Great Sunday and Palm Sunday. The decisions will be made taking into account various circumstances, security situation and situation on the ground. That's why I wouldn't like to make any conclusions from that. Let's give an opportunity, let's provide an opportunity to our, and not only our diplomats, but diplomats that represent countries where people are waiting for the Palm Sunday, to let them work, and let's pray for the success. Ms. Zakharova, yes, Could you please comment? Please speak closer to the mic. Could you please comment on the murder of our 3 Lebanese colleagues? We have made that on the day it happened. We have provided all the information in every possible detail. Again, I can provide a web link in the transcript of our briefing. Lenta.ru, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We would like to ask you 2 questions. First, we would like to follow on the topic of Cuba. The Ministry of Transportation has reported about the arrival of humanitarian assistance, and we would like to know if Russia plans to send another humanitarian aid to Cuba. At our today's briefing, we have expressed our readiness to provide all the necessary assistance to Cuba and support as well, taking into account threats that are being posed by the U.S. Anatoly Kolonkin tanker has brought humanitarian assistance with 100,000 tons of Russian oil, which has shown commitment to helping Cuba. It is important to remind you who Anatoly Kolotkin is. Well, you probably know who Anatoly Kolotkin is. That's the name of the tanker which brought humanitarian aid to Cuba. Anatoly Kolotkin was an expert in international affairs, and in particular in the law of the sea. He specialized in the law of the sea. I don't know how it was a coincidence. The day as fundamentals of the law of the sea are being destroyed, the tanker bears the name of the person who upheld the international law of the sea and who actually co-sponsored, co-created the international law of the sea. This information is quite interesting and useful, and I will provide again information about Anatoly Kolotkin in the transcript of the briefing. Comments have been made by Sergey Rabkov, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. I can quote his words again. Cuba is our friend and partner in the Caribbean, and we have no right to abandon Cuba. That's why we continue helping Cuba in the future. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for mentioning Mr. Kolotkin. I wanted to mention his name when I was asking about the law of the sea. Just the only thing that I'd like to add, and sorry for interrupting you, I think that in the not too distant future we will publish our position paper on violation on the part of European countries of the law of the sea. I would say that it's a considerable piece of work, so we'd like to continue working on that for quite some time, and I think that in the next couple of days we will publish this paper. I'd like to see that for myself. Thank you. Thank you. Now, on March 26th, the Turkish oil tanker Altura was attacked. It was transporting Russian oil. Is the Russian Foreign Ministry in touch? Does it keep in touch with Turkey? And are there any measures taken to avoid such incidents in the future? Are you talking about tanker Altura in the Black Sea? One of the priority matters in the dialogue with our Turkish partners is the provision of the uninterrupted functioning of the Russian-Turkish strategic projects in energy and security of navigation in the Black Sea. Of course, it also refers to the situation with the strike on the Turkish oil tanker Altura. It was discussed with our partners during our contacts in Moscow and Ankara. We, in particular, emphasized the need for the Turkey to condemn the criminal actions of the Kiev regime and to adopt additional measures to ensure security of energy supplies in the region. We believe that the unacceptability of such actions in the interest of the Turkey itself, it is unacceptable to take such actions in interest of Turkey itself. The Kiev regime will not spare you. It will only salvage itself. And I'm not talking about the country, the people, not the people around him. Zelensky will only care for his life, his skin. He will destroy everything. Take any country, any people. He would commit terrorist attacks on social, civilian, energy, infrastructure facilities, with the only end to save his own life. So other parties sponsor him, and you should remember that if you do that, you will feel the consequences of that. That's the nature of evil. Thank you. Thank you. Do we have Al-Maidin with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. My condolences with regard to the death of your colleagues, to the passing of your colleagues. On behalf of the team of our channel, would like to thank the Foreign Ministry for your solidarity following the death of our journalist in southern Lebanon. Russia has expressed concern numerous times with regard to the conflict around Iran and how it affects the Caspian Sea. At the same time, on March 30th, the Israeli army said that it launched strikes on air defense systems and a port in the Caspian Sea that connects Russia with Iran. What is the response of Moscow concerning this development? I do not have any information on new Israeli strikes against air defense facilities of Iran on the Caspian shoreline. I think it would be reasonable to once again say that the Caspian Sea is a safe space for a peaceful and mutually beneficial cooperation. The freedom from any military confrontation should be ensured there. The threats against the Caspian Sea when it comes to transportation of goods is unacceptable to us, and we believe that it should be condemned from all the countries. Thank you. Do we have bold news with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Moldovan authorities continue their process from withdrawing from the CIS. The parliament is now considering this issue. The Republic said that it wants to denounce 60 other agreements, treaties that were adopted within the CIS. How can you comment on it? The Moldovan authorities, led by Sandu, have repeatedly talked about their plans to withdraw from the CIS, so there's nothing surprising about these statements now. It's their sovereign rights, but the Moldovan people should somehow be notified about these future decisions. Russia, apart from other partners of Chisinau, does not interfere in sovereign matters of a state. But the policies to integrate with Europe taken by Moldova and the disruption of long-time connections with countries in the Eurasian space will deliver a blow to the Moldovan people and will further exacerbate the social and economic situation in the country. Let's look at the statistics. According to the Moldovan official statistics agency, at the end of 2025 years, the import exceeded exports threefold, and the trade deficit imbalance rose by 33%, and it amounted to $7 million US, and it is just in a nutshell how the European Union wants Moldova to join. They could have changed this balance to just demonstrate that Moldovan goods and commodities are in demand, but they don't want to do that. We see that services and goods are getting more expensive. The external debt of Moldova has hit a record high, $11.6 billion US is the number. The share of people living earning a pittance has reached 60%. It's not a natural disaster, it's a man-made disaster, and its name is Sandu. The regime that came to power in Moldova used the money from the West. I'd like to talk now about the cessation of the participation in the CIS. According to Article 9 of the statute, every state wanting to withdraw from the CIS should 12 months prior to the withdrawal notify in written form the Secretariat, the committee. Then, following that, the review of all the treaties is going to take place. We're talking about 200 treaties and 600 of decisions by supreme bodies of this organization. A list of we'll also talk about the list of treaties that the country can remain a part of. We're talking about the unified CIS budget and covering the debt of Moldova. And we're not talking about only Russian-Moldovan relations, but relations of Moldova and other countries. It's not done automatically. The list of the treaties that Moldova can remain part of is identified following a scrupulous expertise. It's not a buffet where you can choose any food you want. It's not a market where Chisinau can just choose whatever it wants and what is in its interest. Some statements made by Moldovan politicians present a manipulation, because Moldovans ask what will be the consequences of our withdrawal from the CIS. The situation is already dire, and we will face obligations, and the population will bear a burden, a heavy burden, following it. The Moldovan authorities answer, it's not going to be bad, just don't be concerned, but I've just shared with you all the details about the necessary procedures, so it seems to us that the Moldovan authorities are surreptitiously trying to not have any honest discussion with their society, with the people, discussion about the future of their country, which is of importance. Of course, the constructive forces in Moldova say that it will have dire consequences. That's why they suffocate their media outlets. Thank you very much. Do we have Anna Dolu with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I only have one question. Zelensky toured the Middle East recently, and following that, he said that he struck a historical defense agreement. What is Russia's stance towards that, and how would that influence its relations with Arabic states? Did I hear you correctly? You said he toured the Middle East. Is that correct? Is that the right wording? We understand that we're talking about some kind of agreements in terms of defense. Maybe he started asking Persian Gulf countries to help him join the European Union. I'd like to say that traditionally we have refrained from making comments with regard to bilateral treaties that foreign states sign if it does not concern the interests of the Russian Federation. It is with respect that we treat the sovereign rights of Qatar and Saudi Arabia to sign mutual defense agreements. It should not be represented as an attempt to show the spirit of solidarity between the Persian Gulf countries and Ukraine, and we hope that the relations between our country and the Persian Gulf countries will continue developing. But the terrorist Kiev regime commits crimes against the civilian population, so everyone who supports this regime should realize what their money is spent on. But we do communicate this position of ours to our partners. Thank you very much. Do we have Голос Отечества with us? Madam Zakharova, Голос Отечества, Oleg Sharikov. I have one question only. Sergey Lavrov, when given an interview in France TV, said that Trump's statements are unacceptable, and he was talking about ignoring international law. Russian Foreign Minister said that Russia did not defend Iran, but the international law, and Iran is the strategic partner of Moscow. Does it mean that communicating our position during the negotiations with the U.S. on the root causes in Ukraine is the return to the legal field, meaning the international law? What does it mean to return to international law? We've always been part of international law. We've never talked about disregard or refusal to be part of this international law. We have always been talking about how we are trying to preserve it, to keep it, because we see that at this stage there is no alternative to international law. So I'm not sure that this word that you used, the return, can be used here when it comes to the questions addressed to the Russian side. If you're talking about the return of the U.S. to international law, I think you should turn to them with this question. Russia has always called upon the U.S. and the collective West to adhere to the international law, and we have been doing that not because it's our personal opinion, but because these are the obligations that they took upon themselves when they became members of the UN, when they accepted it, the UN Charter, and signed a number of international instruments. We draw special attention to not allowing the fragmentation of international law or selective approach when choosing the appropriate international norms. In his interview, Russian Minister Sergey Lavrov gave an exhaustive explanation. So, in this regard, I'd like to say that when communicating with the U.S. administration, now we're always sharing our steady position on the need to eliminate the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine, taking into account the situation on the ground and international norms of international law. Thank you very much. Do we have Ross Media with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I represent Ross Media. My name is German Gurunov. We have two questions. How does Moscow assess the red lines for Russia if the conflict in the Middle East escalates when it comes to the threats to our allies and destabilization of the situation in the region? I think that one should not simplify the situation, the developments that we see today in the Middle East and in the Persian Gulf. It's not like you take pencils of different colors and start to draw. It's an unprecedented escalation spiraling out. It's like you're playing with fire and you risk to see a total inferno that will rage in the Middle East and engulf the whole world. That's what we're talking about. It's not like that we're using just metaphors for the sake of using metaphors. We're talking about a comprehensive review of the situation, the new Middle East crisis that has been provoked by an unfounded aggression by Israel and the U.S. against Iran has been going on for more than a month now. But we remember that they were talking about just a couple of days or a couple of weeks. But then it transformed into, well, until the end of March. Now we're at the beginning of April, and we see, regrettably, how the situation is only getting worse. The conflict is being dragged out, it's being protracted, and those who instigated it feel their impunity. But then it was supplanted by their confusion. They don't know what to do next. Sometimes their beliefs are running counter to the beliefs at the very outset of the conflict, and the region is being thrown into chaos, instability, destabilization. And the main threat to our key allies in the region, which include Iran, that we have been building strategic ties with, our position is that we talk about countries that use the power of the strongest instead of the rule of law. It's just wrong. And this is a concrete example that shows how we think and how we act. That does not work, does not improve the situation. It just makes it worse. Just not somehow worse. It's becoming tragically worse. The consequences can be catastrophic for the region, and you cannot forecast them. Transportation corridors, energy infrastructure have been affected so far. No, not only the region, but the whole economy depends on the stability in the region. We see that states have now been affected that care about the stability in terms of energy prices and food prices. Now, this most vulnerable states can include the countries of the European Union that used to call themselves a blossoming garden of Eden. We don't think that this escalation can be controlled. That's a lie, and it cannot be solved with using of force. It only can be used using diplomatic and political means. But it is only through diplomacy and negotiations that this conflict can be resolved, can be addressed. There's no doubt that sooner or later everyone will realize that. It's just important to ensure that it's not too late. Thank you very much. The second question. Can one talk about the cooperation, security cooperation between China, Iran, and Russia? Or is it just a coincidence that it is good for us to cooperate now? Russia and Beijing have been cooperating on Iranian dossier for a long time. We are true friends of Tehran, and we are truly interested in what's happening in this country. In the joint statement in May 2025, the parties confirmed their commitment to play a constructive role in settling the Iranian nuclear program. They underlined that it would contribute to peace and stability in the region. You can check it. It happened about a year ago. On the international arena, we act in coordination in the spirit of strategic partnership. We promote the global role of the UN. We promote the establishment of the new just world order. The special spirit of our interstate relations promotes that our assessments of the global situation are similar or coincide. It has not been dictated by the situation in the world now. We have built steady relations, and they have become steady, enduring against the backdrop of the changes that we have not seen for hundreds of years. We promote territorial integrity, security, stability, ensuring an indivisible architecture of indivisible architecture of European security, and we are against any threats that can be posed against our countries. Author E.
Yes, hello. After E speaking, on March 28th, 29th, Russia has suppressed the attempts to organize riots with regard to the restrictions and blockings of the internet, and the official position, how the official position of the foreign ministry with regard to the criticism towards Russia with regard to the freedom of the internet. And who is criticizing? Those who do not recognize hundreds of killed children in the Iranian schools. They're criticizing us after depriving our journalists of their accreditation, after blocking our publications and videos on international platforms. Well, they are worried about the freedom of speech, but they need to work and improve themselves. They have what to tell us. They have a lot of their own problems. They have only problems in their arsenal, in particular in their information space. Their journalists are dying, and they support those who kill journalists. Even their NGOs that are responsible for monitoring the freedom of speech and who are responsible for helping journalists, even these NGOs have been distorting information instead of supporting freedom of speech. These organizations have been selecting journalists that should be supported, and those journalists that should be ignored. I don't even want to speak about this. We'll figure it out on our own without their assistance. Because when they offer us help, well, it means that we will be in trouble. We'll just figure it out on our own. We don't need their help. Well, they are worried about our free internet. They have no other worries on their agenda. Like promises of democracy. Well, recently, the President of Russia has adopted a decree of August 19th, 2024, on providing humanitarian support to individuals who share traditional Russian spiritual and moral values. Changes were made to this decree. In particular, visas will be granted to those individuals who share traditional Russian spiritual and moral values. What's your position on that? Why these changes were made to the document? In line with paragraph 4 of the presidential decree, the private visa for up to 3 months could be issued to a foreign national or a stateless person from a country that is included in a list of foreign countries and territories pursuing a policy that imposes destructive neoliberal ideological beliefs that go against traditional Russian spiritual and moral values that were approved by the governmental decree of September 17, 2024. And this visa can be issued in any Russian diplomatic mission or consular mission, including in a state that is not added to this list. At the same time, to get this visa, in the Russian foreign mission in a country that is not a state of which the citizen is a national and that is not added to the list of countries. The issue is not, the visa is not issued in this case, and by simplifying the visa processing procedure for citizens who share the traditional Russian moral and spiritual values, it's not just a migratory measure, it's a strategic step that will ensure the future of our country. We are not just receiving new citizens, but we are receiving conscious allies and people who made their choice and they are ready to make their own contribution, to apply their talents and show love for our country. They are not just come here for easy money, or just they don't come here to have an opportunity, but they come here for an opportunity to live in harmony with their consciousness and to raise their children in traditional values and be part of a strong and sovereign country. They won't be ground by electoral cycles. Well, they want to be part of a country, of a civilization that upholds its own interests and helps those who need support and cannot live without its support. They want to be strong. They want to be part of a strong and sovereign country. There are many sovereign countries. Well, there are fewer sovereign countries, but yet still they exist. And as the practice shows, there is more and more people like that, and this program has a large and prominent future. Thank you. You've just made a very important step. European newsletter, please. Valery Lebedev. Hello. Well, it's quite a difficult agenda, but since it's April 1st, we try to stay positive. So my question is, well, any question? Yes, you're welcome to ask. Well, I have an idea for you. From the one point of view, we support all our compatriots and citizens who were born in the USSR. From the other part, we are dealing with the total ignorance and professional degradation of many Western officials whose work has an influence on the international life. Well, probably we need to allocate seats in our leading universities like Moscow State University, MGIMO, Diplomatic Academy, and others, and invite our compatriot Kaya Kallas, for example, and other EU officials to improve their knowledge and qualifications. You know, it's up to citizens of countries that Kaya Kallas is responsible for. I don't think it's a funny topic. I understand that you will trying to ask this question, well, probably as a joke, but this topic is very difficult. We have just talked about improving lives of people, families, and their children by imposing anti-scientific gender agenda. And they're taking actions against them because people do not want to embrace this agenda. These authorities have been maiming future generations. So many children, the present adults, have lost their identities, not just cultural, ethnic identity, but human identity as the result of these actions. When they were offered to identify themselves not as anybody, but as anything, they could identify themselves not just as animals, but as objects, for example. People are disoriented, and they could be, and as a result, they are pliable and can adopt any point of view and will vote for anything. We need to find those who really want to take lessons and who respects science and culture of a country that offers such educational services. And as for those people that you named in your question, well, they should be put in prison. And another thing that I would like to add, well, we have been talking about it for the third time because, well, that's not funny. That's actually sad. I would like to recall we need to teach to educate Kaya Kallas. Where? In university? I'm sorry, but her mistakes and mistakes made by her fellows. These lessons are not given in university, but yet in school. For example, geometry, 6 years of studies, when in February 2023, the Munich Security Council and Foreign Minister of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, called Russia to make a 360-degree turn to change its approach. I apologize, but any school student knows that a 360-degree turn will put you in the same place where you started to make this turn. Well, I think they tried to explain Baerbock where she was wrong. Well, Baerbock doesn't know geometry, and we'll need to give an F here. Geography, 7-year studies. In the 2022, Foreign Minister of Great Britain, Liz Truss, stated to BBC that London supports the Baltic allies through the Black Sea. Well, that's how she knows geography, because Baltic and Black Seas are thousands of kilometers apart. In what universities should we place those two? Again, they should have learned that at school. And again, we give enough for their knowledge. And Liz Truss, when she had negotiations with Sergey Lavrov, when she was asked the question whether she recognizes the Russian sovereignty over Rostov and Voronezh regions, she stated with confidence that she will never recognize Russian sovereignty over these territories. And at that time, the Russian ambassador started to whisper her something by briefly explaining where these regions are, and that Rostov and Voronezh have been part of Russia since the 14th century. Again, that's a bad mark for Liz Truss. She knows nothing about history. Again, talking about Kallas, she claimed that it was new to her that USSR and China has defeated fascism. No one believed what they heard, but it's true. She truly said that. She said that in the 80th anniversary of victory over Nazism and fascism and the end of the World War II and of the Great Patriotic War and of the war in Europe. And she said that in this anniversary year that she was surprised in the contribution that the USSR and China had made to the defeat of Nazism. Our country has lost 27 million people in this war. We have hoisted a victory flag in Reichstag, over Reichstag in Berlin. And she believes that the USSR didn't defeat fascism in the Western and Eastern fronts. Again, it should be studied at school. She also stated that over the past 100 years, Russia has attacked 19 countries, and no country of these 19 countries has ever attacked Russia over the past 100 years. Does this list include World War I, World War II, intervention of 1918? Again, this is the basic school program. And by the way, the Estonian court has already made her refute some of her statements. but I think that she is no longer under the jurisdiction of the Estonian court, or Estonian court doesn't care anymore. And what about Biden, for example? For decades, he has been confusing Cambodia and Colombia, Ukraine with Iran, and the President Macron with Francois Mitterrand, who died in 1996, and the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz with the Helmut Kohl, who died in 1998. And the White House had to make changes to the official transcripts of his speeches. You want to educate them? Well, you don't need to do that because it's useless, because we have always been providing seats for those who want to take lessons and who treats the country that provides educational services with respect. Our universities, Moscow State University, MGIMO Diplomatic Academy, train highly skilled professionals. And we should remember the People's Friendship University. That is a beloved university all over the world because its alumni have become prominent figures in science, culture, politics, healthcare in countries of their origin. We should provide services for them. And I have a small request for you. I have been working in archives for many months in the library of Ivan the Terrible, and I ended up in a situation when I started to see Ivan the Terrible in my dreams. But since I was absent for so many months at your briefings, I started to see you in my dreams, like Maria the Terrible. So please don't be angry at me for being absent at my briefings for a long period of time. Well, you probably prefer to Ivan the Terrible to be present at your dreams. Okay, thank you, farewell, and see you next time.